Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Start. Okay, good afternoon, members, and welcome to the first in-person committee session of the new year. And for anybody who is watching the broadcast, just to take the opportunity to wish everybody a happy new year. In terms of the housekeeping, first of all, I would just advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And for anyone in the public gallery, reminder that you're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi, and password details for that are available in the gallery rules. And again, as usual, the reminder, it's not permitted to photograph or record any part of today's proceedings. So that's the housekeeping out of the way, and just take us straight to item 1, which is apologies. So I have apologies in from Peter Martin, and also just to note that both Colin and Michelle will be joining the meeting remotely today. They're both unwell, so we're probably all glad they're not sharing their germs. And Michelle in particular has asked it just to be noted that she has lost her voice, so we'll be trying to maybe send her questions through via the clerk if she's able to. So that takes us on then to item 2 on the agenda as chairperson's business. So there are two items that I wanted just to flag at this stage. The first, and it's in your tabled papers, so page 3 of tabled papers. So we had a statement from the Minister this week in the Assembly around special educational needs reform and his agenda in that regard. While on the one hand I would want to begin by welcoming that we have SEN on the agenda, and it was important to have the opportunity to question the Minister on that in the Chamber. I would like this stage to outline just my concern at the lack of detail that was in that statement. We really didn't have any sense of a timescale as to when we're going to see a plan. There was no clarity around how much of this was going to be resourced. And my view would be is that it felt quite preemptive, and it feels like an ongoing pattern of stalling the launch of the actual delivery plan on that. And I think we have discussed that at length here in committee, the need for something that's time bound, that has very clear measures of success, and that ideally would be costed. And I think the lack of certainty around funding is something that I would certainly note as a concern. So while it is good to see that there is some work going on, we are very far away from where we need to be. So I would like to propose at this stage, and I'm happy to open up to members after that, but I'll set out what I think at this stage would be an appropriate intervention from committee. I would suggest that we may want to write to the Minister to outline those concerns. We've been looking at work on this since 2023, early 23, so we are nearly 2 years into this process, and I would suggest we might want to emphasise the committee's desire to see the delivery plan urgently delivered and seek further detail on all of those things that he outlined where there's going to be some action happening in the short term, to actually get detail on what those look like, because it was extremely high level in terms of what was presented to us. And then as a second action, I think it is important that we would write to both Jane Brady and the Northern Ireland Office in relation to the Interim Public Service Transformation Board and clarity around the status of that board and when we are going to see money released to the executive so that these projects can be funded. And I think it would be important to emphasise that this is not an insignificant project that has been put forward by the department. It's a critical PFG action, and I don't think we would want to see that flounder due to delays with the transformation board. Those are my two suggestions in terms of how we may want to respond to that, but I'm happy to open that up to the floor if there's agreement, or if anyone has any other views in relation to how we would want to proceed with that.
Yes, Chair, I agree with that, and I think we should put a particular focus on what collaboration is taking place between the department and the health department.
Yeah, I think the statement was quite vague on that point. It said he will look to engage with the Department of Health, or seek to, I think was the phrase, which I really think we need to be way beyond seeking to collaborate, and it needs to be very clear how that's going to be done. Any other views, or are we content to proceed on that basis? No. Okay. The other item I just wanted to raise, we had the urgent oral in the chamber this week in relation to the Minister's decision around the integrated transformation proposals from the two primary schools in Bangor. I don't want to necessarily rehearse the details of that discussion here, but I did want to sort of highlight that obviously there was a lot of disappointment, and I know certainly those particularly Bangor Academy would have a big catchment in my own constituency, so I'm well aware of the really, really strong feeling locally and the disappointment that was felt by that. But I think maybe to try and get a focus on the issues related to it, rather than maybe some of the emotional aspects of it, I think it might be advisable to look at maybe getting an evidence session penciled in the not too distant future on integrated education, both to hear from the department in terms of their ongoing work on the strategy and action plan, but also from stakeholders such as NICE and IEF, to get a stock take of where we're at with the issues pertaining to integrated education. So I put that out as a proposal as well, but happy to open up to the floor. So.
Well, Chair, the difficulty in this is that we're not sure now if other schools want to transform to integrated status, what hurdles they have to get over. And they go through quite an onerous process in order even to get a proposal put to the Minister in the first place. And all that could be for nothing if the Minister then says, well, there isn't a reasonable number of either Catholics or Protestants in that particular school, so therefore I can't grant integrated status. If the Minister was to make clear what he believes a reasonable number is, then it would provide clarity to every school that might want to transform to integrated where they should be. But I mean, I say that in the view that is only going to be decided by a High Court judge in a judicial review. So.
Yes, I agree. I think it is likely that these matters will probably be worked out in the courts. But I do think there is a lot of uncertainty now around that. I think in terms of that balancing of the aiming to meet demand versus how you actually assess whether or not a school can transform to be integrated in the first place. So I think evidence sessions might help us just have an appropriate focus on those issues. David?
Yes, Chair, I have no objection at all to having an evidence session. I think actually to have engagement, as I think we had some level in the German debate and with a different tone last night. But I do, to put on record my own position as I have in the chamber, that I think that in the court of public opinion, if not, we'll soon see if there's proceedings brought. But in the court of public opinion, I think that many people will certainly think that when they hear the term integrated school or integrated education, they envision something that is higher than 3%. And I think that, and obviously the demography and so on of different areas may be a challenge for some schools to reach that, whatever their aspirations, and understand that. But even in terms of that number relative to the demography in Bangor and so on, I think it's still low. So I think that there is a clear logic that even those who I think would be sympathetic to integrated education at large would think that 3% is still quite a low number for that. And that ultimately is what is laid out in legislation in terms of reasonable numbers. Now, it may be there may be a move to try and define that and so on. That's not for me to discuss, but I do think it's something that it's been part of the criteria, and while we say that there's a onerous process, I understand that. While we understand that there's been a vote held at the school, nevertheless there is another aspect, and if it doesn't meet that other aspect, I think it's incumbent upon the minister to refuse it on that basis, or make a decision taking all of the criteria into account, and I think that is what he's done. So just put that on record.
No.
I just
no,
again,
please
on that,
do, yes.
and I acknowledge what David's saying, and I accept that 3% is a low number. I mean, there's no doubt about that. However, there are other criteria involved as well, and one of the questions that needs to be asked of the minister is what weight they give to each one of those criteria, and you know, is this issue of Catholics and Protestants the criterion that is most heavily weighted? You know, all of those sorts of issues. So,
and I think it would be useful for the committee to have that discussion. Yeah. And again, as you say, it may end up in the courts. I'd probably not. With time, will probably not permit us to have the debate today.
And just to finish on this point, I mean, officials are well known for being risk averse, and they advised the minister that he could go ahead, whereas the minister was very clear that he had a statutory responsibility not to go ahead. And the issue in all of this too, which seems to be forgotten in the midst of all of this, the minister has a statutory obligation to encourage, facilitate and support integrated education, and that means he has quite a bit of flexibility when it comes to dealing with integrated education and also Irish medium, because he also has a duty to encourage and facilitate Irish medium education. So, you know, there's a lot to be examined in all of this, and as I say, I mean, I think it's more likely to take place in the courts than anywhere else, but it would be good to have that discussion anyway in the committee.
I'm not going to get into the full debate, but very briefly, I just
draw this one to a close.
Advisors advise, ministers decide. I think we'd all agree that it's important that the power does rest with the ministers rather than civil servants in these matters, even and sometimes that means that they will differ. I accept your point that there are different ways of looking at integration, and actually Northern Ireland is a changing place with new communities, and many of our schools in different sectors are very, very diverse in different ways, and you know, it does actually provide a challenge, I think, to how we think of integration and what that looks like. But I think that's something that actually an evidence session can help us get to the bottom of, because there's no doubt, whilst your point is valid and something that I would agree with, I think in Northern Ireland, when we talk about integrated education, the public imagine that dynamic between the two traditional communities, and because the raison d'etre, if you will, of integrated education was to try and bring the two communities together. I think outside of what the ministerial interpretation has been around the legislation and so on, I think many people will look and say that if you're trying to bring the two communities together, is 3%, you know, doing justice to the integrated name?
I could just come in there, David. I think that for me, one thing that has been missing in the debate is that the minister, by his decision, didn't allow the school the opportunity to do anything about that balance that it had either. And he said, "That's it. You're the finished article at 3%, and we won't."
You'd say they don't need his. They don't need his assent or permission to start taking some of those decisions themselves.
It does seem to me that the transformation process is a journey rather than a destination at the point you put the development proposal in. But I think at that stage we'll draw a line under it, and then I think we have agreement that we'll seek an evidence session on the issue, and that will give us the opportunity to discuss all of this in the round. Okay, item 3 is declaration of interests. So do any members have any interest that they wish to declare in relation to any of the briefings on today's agenda?
Sure. Just to advise, I've mentioned, I know we all have mentioned and don't tend to repeat it, but I've previously mentioned my wife is a governor at Crory Grammar School. I've only today been informed that she has, from December, been a member of the Mitchell House Board of Governors without my knowledge. So just to put on record today, so people are aware, it shouldn't cause any issues, but she's now on that Board of Governors as well.
Thank you for that. If that can just be noted. Okay, so that moves us on then to item 4. It's matters arising. Now, I ordinarily would bring this in as correspondence or AOB, but just given that we have the EA in for a briefing, I thought it was appropriate just to bring it in at this stage, and it's really just to highlight the correspondence from one of the committee members, Cara Hunter, who wrote into the committee before Christmas, and that was specifically in relation to the appointment of the new chair of the Board of the Education Authority, and members will have that in their packs in the correspondence section. And the correspondence was essentially drawing out some concerns around that process and potential conflicts of interest. So I'll hand over to Cara just to speak to that, and then we'll need to just make, I think, fairly quickly a decision in terms of how we want to proceed, because I would just add at this stage, I suspect while we do have the EA in, they weren't involved in that process, so there may not be a lot in the evidence session that can really be done on that particular item. So I'll hand over to you, Cara.
Thank you, Chair. No, just very briefly, I just thought before Stormont came to a close there, this came in, I think it was December 15th, 16th. I thought it was important to highlight and share with the committee my concerns, and I do note the previous Public Appointments Commissioner had said this is exactly the kind of case her successor should be investigating, and I'm mindful in the absence of a commissioner at the moment, I just thought it's something we as a committee should be looking into, and I do note that some of the trade unions as well have been very vocal in how they feel about this also, so I think it's important for us as a committee to highlight.
Yeah, I mean, if I can maybe suggest how I think we might want to take this forward, I'd want to put this all with just the overarching context that nothing I say here is any reflection in the capability of Mervyn Storey as a chair of the board. No doubt, and given his background, Mervyn is eminently qualified for the role. That the issue is around potential perceptions of conflict of interest. So my suggestion would be, given that we do need to be clear, and it's a matter of, it's on the public record that the new chair is a sitting elected representative for the minister's own party. There have been concerns raised around a potential conflict of interest there and his capacity to act independently in the role. So I would suggest there's maybe two things we could do. One is to write to the department, seek full clarity on the process, just get a full breakdown in writing of how the process was administered. But I think crucially to get a sense from the department of what advice was provided to the minister around the potential conflict of interest in relation to that appointment of a sitting councillor from his own party. And I think secondary to that, you've mentioned the Commissioner for Public Appointments. We could consider writing to the Executive Office to get an update on when we are likely to be seeing a new Commissioner in post, but also write to the Office of the Commissioner for Public Appointments and seek their assessment of the issues around a conflict of interest of a sitting elected rep taking that role from the Minister's party. Those would be my proposals. Are we in agreement that satisfactorily deals with the?
It's just about clarity and transparency, and I think that's a good call.
Yeah, sure. I have no issue with information being sought on that basis, but just to reinforce the point that you made, I do think that Mervyn Storey is vastly experienced and has been involved in the area for some time, has a CV that will match anyone's, and I think is more than capable of the role. And I don't share those concerns, but I do, if committee wishes to seek that information, I've no objection to that.
Thank you, David. And look, I think to be fair, in Cara's correspondence, there was no suggestion that Mervyn was not a qualified individual, simply that the perception of a public perception of a potential conflict of interest was the issue. Okay, so I think we have agreement on that. Item 5, draft minutes. So I'd refer members to the draft minutes of the committee meetings of both the 11th of December 24 and the 8th of January 25, pages 8 and 16. And I would just seek members' agreement that they're a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. I'll just sign those. It's here and here. Okay, thanks. Okay, so that takes us on to item 6 on our agenda, and that is a briefing. It forms part of the committee's Relationships and Sexuality Education Inquiry, and it's an oral briefing from Professor Dirk Schubotz, so you're very welcome here with us this afternoon. So I'll just begin by referring members to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 20, and then we have a range of briefing papers provided by Professor Schubotz, pages 22 to 99 of your packs, and then also pages 19 and 20 of tabled papers. So thank you for joining us today. today. It's very good to have you here, and we're looking forward to hearing that local perspective, particularly around the youth engagement that you have undertaken around this issue, and also thank you also for the very helpful literature summary in this issue. It was really comprehensive and very helpful for the wider inquiry, not just our session today. So I'm really going to hand over to you at this stage for an initial presentation, which I would ask is up to 10 minutes in length, and then we'll move on to questions and answer. We have a big agenda today, so we'll probably be moving through the question and answer session fairly quickly. So if I could ask members to get to their questions and to be as concise in answers as possible. So I'll hand over to you, and thank you again
Chair,
for your time.
First of all, Chair, I just want to thank you and the committee for the opportunity to be here in person. I really appreciate that. It's an area that's really of high importance for what I've been doing over the last 25 years since I've moved here to Northern Ireland, and for that reason, normally I would speak freely and be quite happy to make a 30-minute statement freely, but it's important enough to say the right things that I took the chance to write it down. And I timed myself. It will be about 8 minutes, so hopefully that's acceptable. Okay, so as a professor of youth and social policy, I'm passionate about young people. You appreciate that, and young people's lives, and informing policy making with and for young people in order to improve their lives. So my starting point of my statement for that is that I therefore believe that children and young people are not just the future. We hear that very often from adults, but also, unfortunately, from children and young people themselves, that we are the future. Young people are the present. They're right here, right now, behind me, if I saw correctly, as well, some of them. So, and for that reason, I think we need to take them very serious. And they're an integral part of our society. They're an integral part for what we are doing. It is our job to make sure that what we do affect their lives in a positive way. People have given evidence before me here in the committee, and I've taken note of that and read that, made statements, and have articulated the need that we need to listen more to children and young people with regard to RSE. And of course, the United Nations Convention provides a legal and binding framework for us to do that. And there's strong evidence that our best chance to meet children's and young people's needs is to take a collaborative and participatory approach in the delivery of RSE, which includes all stakeholders. And by that, I mean specifically stakeholder, also the children and young people. And that we ought to go out of our way to listen to them and hear what their needs are and take them serious. And I just want to step back a little bit and take a sidestep to remind ourselves of the recent COVID-19 pandemic. And one of our learnings from the pandemic was that we paid a very difficult and hard price, in particular children and young people, for not taking their concerns serious at the time. And some of the most long-lasting victims of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it was dealt with that were children and young people in terms of the educational outcomes, but also in terms of the mental health. So, and I think there's a very strong case. We promised we would learn from that. I think I want to reiterate that there's a very strong case that we do that, and that we do that in relation to relationship and sexuality education. Now, you have seen that my first job in Northern Ireland, when I came here, I first came quite a long time ago in 91, but then came here to work and live just before the millennium, was to undertake a study of sexual attitudes and lifestyles of young people, and that didn't exist at the time in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland was excluded from the large NATSAL study in the rest of the UK. And I believe that one of the reasons, or the main reason why Northern Ireland was excluded, not the lack of will from mainland GB, but the fact that there was no fieldwork company willing and able to conduct the fieldwork here in Northern Ireland. It was that much of a taboo subject that nobody was willing to talk to adults, aged 18 plus, about their sexual attitudes and their behaviors. So only that is the reason why I'm here. And the study came about. And my experience as a researcher on that study at the time undertaken at the University of Ulster was that young people were not afraid to talk about sexual health and sexual behaviors and relationships. In fact, they were longing to do that. And they were longing to do that in a very open and trusting way with adults. They were willing to listen to them and to their real concerns to do that. Okay, and I think, unfortunately, And the main focus of that was always the relationships. It wasn't a sexual act, right? So there was always information about how to have sex is easily available in textbooks, even then before the internet was really prominent and before social media came about. That's what was not the purpose. The purpose was, or the reason, what they were really lacking was a conversation about how a healthy, trusting relationship looks like. And at the moment, I think we don't have that in schools. The modus operandi that we have in the schools at the moment is one-off sessions delivered in an assembly hall, where a teacher or an external agency comes in and brings them all together, talks at them, and then leaves. There's no proper conversation in most of the schools possible about relationships. And we also know that there's no shortage of information, of course, outside the school space around sex and sexual relationships. But the problem with that information that is that and the problem with the information is that a lot of the information is not trustworthy. And young people recognize that the information isn't trustworthy. So they're looking for information like that delivered in school. I just want to remind the committee that 9 in 10 P7 children, according to our last Kids Life and Time survey, so that's all P7 children in Northern Ireland, own a mobile phone. And 84% of them access the internet daily. Okay? So it's not that they don't have access to information and they're not accessing information, they do. I don't need to convince you that that information is not helpful or child-friendly in some ways. Okay, so children and young people are groomed and targeted online and offline, as we know, and the ignorance and lack of knowledge is what facilitates that grooming and abuse of children and young people. And I would urge the committee to encourage the department to put measures in place to provide trustworthy information in school. I don't think the internet replaces planned, organized curriculum that is delivered by skilled professionals, and by that I mean our teachers, who are very highly skilled professionals, in an accessible and trustworthy manner that enables young people to make informed and positive decisions about their intimate relationships in a competent way. Whilst most parents, of course, will want to have the best for their children, they are also not really equipped to deliver that information and sometimes don't feel confident and comfortable to do that. So the most, as I said already, the most aspect of RSE are the relationships, not the sex acts, but the relationships. And what is acceptable and what is not. How do I identify as a young person a toxic relationship, an abusive relationship? How do I know what is coercive control? How do I seek support from whom and how and when? Okay. So many young people have no opportunity to discuss any of that at the moment in school. And unfortunately, over the last 25 years, in all the research they've done, nothing has really changed in relation to that. So we have to make a real change here for young people, I think. Some of the data that I've collected through the Young Life and Time survey of 16-year-olds that takes place every year doesn't make for very pleasant reading. Just for last year, we found that half of the 16-year-old women and 1 in 4 16-year-old men have experienced at least one form of gender-based violence in the last 12 months. We are talking about 16-year-olds. Over 8 in 10 16-year-olds had neither heard or knew what coercive control is and what it means, how it looks like. Half of the 16-year-old girls, and that's a particularly harrowing statistics in relation to the new strategy on violence against women and girls that, of course, we have and that our survey has reported, is that half of the 16-year-olds sometimes or always feel unsafe when they're using public transport or other public spaces. And the most spaces where young people, young women and young men experience gender-based violence is online, but secondly, it's in school. And third is in public spaces. Now, while we cannot control what's happening in online, we certainly can take responsibility for what happens in school and in public places. And I think we should. And one way of doing that is to have honest conversations with young people about how relationships look like, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. The last statistic I want to present here before I conclude is that about 1 in 10 young people in our surveys, and that was the same in the Towards Better Sexual Health survey, had sex when they first had sex because they felt they should, or because they were forced to have sex, but they certainly articulated that they weren't ready for that. Again, it's our job to enable that the first sex is a positive experience. So I'm not here to convince you, and I haven't brought like a brilliant German system of sex education or a Scandinavian system. And the truth is that they don't exist either. But I'm here to convince you that what we can do, we can put a decent, appropriate Northern Irish system in place. And I think that that's our responsibility to that. And people talk about RSE being an ordinary subject and should be taught and treated like an ordinary subject. I don't personally think this is right. No, RSE is not an ordinary subject because it goes to the core of who we are as human beings. Our relationships, our emotions, how we feel. We are only human beings and social beings because of the relationships that we have. So from that point of view, I would very strongly advocate that RSE is actually probably the most important subject we should teach in school because it's core to who we are. And we need to take that very serious. It's much more easy to teach math and physics and things like that because it doesn't really go to our emotions and our core who we are. And I finish off by saying that the last statistic, because I hear, and it was very interesting to hear conversation about integrated education earlier, that's one of the other areas I'm really interested in, is that we have to remember in all of that, there's always a conversation about the ethos of the school. The RSE has to take place within the ethos of the school. I just want to remind you also, and of course all our schools are Christian schools, that's what the ethos is. I want to remind you that Northern Ireland is also a changing place, and I heard that very clearly when you were talking earlier. The majority, or the largest group of 16-year-olds for a number of years in our survey has been the group who have no confessional connections, who are not believing in anything. To what extent I'm going to ask you is a religious ethos going to meet the needs of these young people? I think we need to have a conversation about that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's all been really, really helpful. I want to maybe just pick up on sort of your penultimate point as a starter, and you used that phrase that RSE should not be considered an ordinary subject, and I think that's a really interesting perspective. And I think the research you've presented is clear that young people want to get this material in schools. Quite high percentages are saying that that's one of the most important place that they will get some of this information. But in that context, then teacher confidence to teach this subject is really critical. So I just wondered really from your research, your engagement with young people and any other research you've carried out, given that you've said you don't consider it to be an ordinary subject, what is the best way to deliver it? Should all teachers be trained to deliver it effectively? Do we need to have specialist RSE teachers, or do we need to bring in expert third parties to deliver this? What would be your view on that?
Yeah, my view on that would be, and I know I'm repeating what other people have said before me here in this room, is that it depends. There's no right or wrong. I would consider teachers as much as parents and young people as really important stakeholders in all of that. And what is right in one school may not be right in the other school. What's important for the young people from our research is that they can have these honest conversations. If particular teachers in particular schools are uncomfortable with that, there's no reason why the school nurse or an external body or peer educators or somewhere could come and deliver that. That's why I said at the start, it's really important that we bring the children, young people on board with that and have a conversation with them about the design of how RSE could look like and how it is delivered. Schools are very different in Northern Ireland. We had this earlier in the conversation. So they're in very different environments. And some are middle class, some are very working class, some are Catholic, some are Protestant, some are really mixed in the area where I live in southeast Belfast. We have all of that. So it depends on the school context. And what is right for one school may not be right for the other. But I do know from conversations with teachers that they want to support this very much. Some more than others. And I think it's about finding the right person who can do that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the biology teacher or the RE teacher or the technology teacher. It's about having a conversation who is the right person to do it.
Thank you, that's helpful. In the literature review that you set out, it was a big focus on the sort of tackling the gender-based violence and that RSE having a really important role in that, and we had a really good debate on that in the chamber yesterday. And I think also in your bio you've had some involvement with the Gillen education group. So given that, could you give us a summary of where you think we're at in terms of Gillen recommendations in the education system in Northern Ireland, and what we would need to do to ensure that RSE is addressing those issues of consent, coercive control, rape myths, all of those issues?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I have to be honest with you, over the last 25 years I've got frustrated with the lack of progress, when I think the evidence is very clear. And I don't think, and I think I think we should approach this all positively. You know, a good relationship sexuality education should be a sex-positive education, which embraces the fact that we are sexual beings. And now, if violence against women and girls is the final jigsaw puzzle that moves us forward because we recognize that it's unacceptable that in particular young women are continue to be at the receiving end of violence, then so be it. I'm quite content with that. Now, the Department of Education had given evidence after the consultation and presented some statistics at the Gillen Education Review Group, and the discussion we had there with the voluntary sectors who are presented around that table is that we cannot play out the children's rights to have sex education and health education against the parental concerns around that. And I think the parents will also recognize that every parent wants their child to be safe, whether they're boys or girls, right? So, and that's really important. I think that should be the bottom line, that whether you're a girl or a boy, you should be able to move without fear in public spaces and in school. That's our job. And if that means that we have to have conversations about relationships, if that's what triggers these conversations that currently don't take place and how they look and what's acceptable and not acceptable, then that's fine. I think Gillen has gone a long way to bring us forward to have these conversations. The recommendations are very clear that rape myth, misogyny, things like that are still way too prevalent in our society here, need to be addressed. And the best way to address them is in schools through relationship sexuality education.
Can I ask you then to be more specific? So, given those recommendations are welcome, how well progressed do you feel we are here in terms of actually enacting them in our schools?
Yeah, I think I see, because I'm involved in research and also as a trustee in sexual health charities for young people, I see that there's a greater demand from schools to bring experts into the school environments to deal with that, because they sometimes, and that could be often through staff training. So organizations that I'm involved with, Common Youth, provides increasingly more staff training in schools. So I think Gillen has certainly pushed the button in terms of recognition that we need to change something here. So I think there has been some progress, but again, if I look at a survey in relation to coercive control, a study I was involved at very recently with Ulster University and Susan Lacton, I don't know if Susan was here, yeah. Then we still have, and I look at what young people say about relationships, and when they discuss and hear about it, it's usually outside the school context. So there's a very long way to go still.
Thank you. I'll hand over to other members now, so thank you for that. Deputy Chair, if you want to come.
Thanks for that, Professor. I have a couple of questions, but they're interrelated. I mean, you'll be aware that schools here in many ways are independent republics. You know,
I understand
they decide
yes.
their own enrolment criteria, they decide what uniforms they want to wear, and other aspects of school life that affects children. And I suppose one of the criticisms that we have heard, particularly from young people, is that the delivery of RSE across schools is inconsistent. In some schools it's done very well, in others it's done very poorly or not at all. So we have that issue of inconsistency, but also related to that is the fact that we have heard from witnesses here at this inquiry, particularly from those of a faith background, who say they're quite happy to teach an RSE or to deliver an RSE curriculum, but they want to overlay it with their own moral framework. So first of all, do you think that is possible? And secondly, how do you get around that particular issue? If that in itself leads to inconsistency? Thanks.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I'm tempted to answer with an anecdote of when I conducted this fieldwork all these years ago. I went to a Catholic school in the northwest in Northern Ireland, and there for the first time I spoke to the RE teacher, who in that particular school, secondary Catholic school, was the teacher who was responsible for RSE delivery. And in the interview with me, she said to me that for the first time they had two 15-year-old girls who were pregnant. And in the past, that meant that they had to leave the school. they were taken out of school, out of sight. Now, for the first time, this teacher, they said, we have to think about this, whether this is the right thing to do. And she came very much from the child-centered approach. What do these young girls need? And she said, as Catholics, we also have to remember there's forgiveness. Now, they may have not acted in the way that the Catholic school, the moral compass that was delivered in that school, suggested they should act, i.e. have sex not before they're married. But they felt that we can deal with that. So what I'm saying to you is that yes, this argument always is forwarded that we can't do that because it has to be taught within the ethos of the school. But the ethos of the school is not a fortress. It can change. And what I'm saying is we can think about, as long as we think about what is really the need of the young person that we're looking at, which is the responsibility of the teachers to do that, we can find a way to do both. I'm not suggesting, advocating that we should replace the religious ethos-based sex education with an agnostic or atheist research relationship and sexuality education, even though I identify as an atheist. And that's not what I'm proposing. That's why I said very clearly, I think there's a way to deliver a relationship sexuality education that meets Northern Ireland's needs and conditions as society, but also puts at the center of all of that the children's needs. And I think for me, that moment was a moment where a penny dropped, where I felt it's possible to deliver a relationship sexuality education in a Catholic ethos, in a Catholic sector, but still at the same time look after the children and young people.
That's very interesting. Thanks very much. Thank you, John.
I've got an indication from David.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair. And thanks for your presentation so far. That was an interesting answer to Pat's question from my point of view, because reading through some of the papers, I probably did take a view that Christianity was treated at times throughout, and not unique to you, that it has been as almost inherently negative and something that RSE should help strip from either schools or people. So I appreciate the answer that you give there. I think you talked in your research, I think you quoted Rasmussen and about something that we touched on committees before, about some of the discussion based education around this and how that would bring in different elements of diversity within a classroom, because someone who does want to maintain that ethos, those ethoses within schools and schools' ability to do that, how do you think that's a helpful way in which we make sure that all people in the classroom are heard and respected and don't feel isolated from their classroom?
Yeah, what I'm advocating is like an open discussion about this. Can we talk about Christianity and sexuality? Of course we can, because Christians are also sexual beings. Yeah? What I'm saying is that, and they have sexual relationships. What I'm saying is it shouldn't be prescriptive. No, we need to be recognizing that society has changed. So where does it leave a young person in a school context, in a Christian school, who may be transgender, homosexual, who may have had sex before they got married? So does that mean now we ignore that? So let's have a conversation about that, and what do we do with situations like that? And the issue is that we know that religious ethos-based sex education actually has the contradictory effect of what it wants to have. And I know you've read evidence about abstinence-based sex education. There's no evidence, if there was any evidence at all, that it would improve the sexual health of young people, I would be the first person who would advocate for it. It doesn't. There's not a shade of the evidence that it does help. The only thing that helps is to have honest conversations with each other. And what's wrong with a disagreement? Right?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with a disagreement. Let's have a conversation and how we treat each other respectfully. We can do that in other ways. And we need to do that in other areas, and we need to do that in relationship sexuality education as well. But again, I repeat, the center of all of that has to be the needs of the young person, and telling them, you got to wait, you have to do this, you have to do X, Y, Z, is not helping at the moment and leads to the opposite effect. It actually disables them to deal with the relationships in a healthy way and seek support if they need to, because they're afraid to do so.
No, speaking personally, I think it doesn't help either churches or, in this context, schools. to close their eyes to changes in society and so on.
Completely agree.
But it is that understanding and respect for the ethos of schools going forward as well. To move to something just in other parts of your one of the thing what was provided in table papers, you talk about how schools should also teach essentially how, actually it may have been quoting research actually, but talked about schools teaching how to make sexual activity pleasurable, and also the autonomy of pupils to make their own decisions. That brings in probably questions about what that kind of teaching would involve and the age appropriateness of that. At what stage do we feel that the children should be making their own decisions around this and being out with the supervision and protection of their parents or responsible adults?
Yeah. I'm not going to go around the room now and ask you all individually whether you have pleasurable sex or not. But what I'm saying is that this is really important for people's lives. We are sexual beings from day one in our lives, and we can't ignore that. That's biologically, that's what.
But I think more specifically, people would look at something like that and ask, in terms of how to make sexual activity pleasurable. What exactly are you proposing to teach children in schools around that?
How their bodies work. A lot of the pleasure comes from having healthy relationships, respectful relationships with each other. And of course, there's a wealth of resources that schools can draw. And I know the Education Authority has actually put a lot of resources online, or that the schools can draw on as well. It has to be around the purpose of sexual relationships and intimate relationships in our lives as human beings, how they work.
And you talked about abstinence and the abstinence-based RSE. There are critiques of it, and I understand that. Read that. I presume at some level, teaching abstinence for those of a young age is surely appropriate. And at what level do you think where do you think that should stop?
Yeah. We know that delaying the first time young people have sex until they really feel ready is one of the most important health outcomes in relation to sexual health, right? So I'm not advocating again to not do that. In fact, if anything, we should do that, but we only do that by helping young people to understand how relationships work, and how to say no, and how to say yes when I'm ready to say yes, and how to negotiate that. So absolutely, it's not appropriate to have sexual relationships with another child when you're P7 or something like that. But what we need to do is we need to start to talk about sexual relationships when.
I think trying to find, when we're talking about sort of, sex positive approach to things and so on, and pushing back against sort of abstinence-based RSE, I think that age and where not you but others as well propose to start that will be a key consideration for parents looking at this as well, and people looking at what's appropriate to teach in schools.
There's a reason why the age of sexual consent in Northern Ireland is 16.
Yes.
So we probably have an understanding that this is a good age when we can have these conversations.
I imagine that a lot of the people who have come here would be advocating starting this kind of education much earlier than 16.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's a challenge to find that line.
Or the education should start earlier, but when we start educate, can talk about that. When is the right time to do that, and why that is, because our bodies still develop, our understanding and emotions of who we are still develop. And it also helps young people we know that there's sexual abuse taking place for children who are much younger than 16. Yeah. It also helps the children to recognize when a touch or a hug, and by whom it is appropriate or not appropriate.
We've heard from NSBCC and so on around that, and the violence against women and girls want to make clear, whilst there's different views on RSE around this table, there are areas of commonality, I think, and that we would agree with that. So thank you for your answers. Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
David, and I think we need to keep revisiting that all of this should be through a lens of age appropriateness. That is, I guess I don't think there's been any contributor who hasn't emphasised that point, that any material needs to be age appropriate. Are any other indications?
I just have one quick question. Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today. I think it's really important that we hear directly from young people, and I think we can really hear your emphasis on their voices being included. I know just in some of the stuff in our pack here, it's really interesting. It talks about males are less likely to learn about things like periods, contraceptives and pregnancy, which is just crazy when you think about the interplay of our relationships throughout our lifetime, and that men will be around women and have different relationships and yet not have the fundamental aspects of education.
Yeah.
But that's no news to you, I'm sure. I just have one quick question off the back of that, which is we have sort of these generations, my generation and so many behind me, who didn't get adequate, comprehensive, fact-based RSE. Do you think that higher education and further education has a role in, so say you're at your freshers, could there be like consent classes? I know there's a really effective feminist society at Queen's who I've spoken with about this matter. What's your beliefs around that?
Completely and utterly agree with you. I was involved in setting up the report and support scheme at Queen's and supported the students when I took the research in the university and advisory role as well. I was involved with the Students' Union to set up bystander training, which is now delivered for everybody who lives in halls of residence. Absolutely, it's not like we finish when we're 18 with all of that. And as he said, it's something I want to say now. Feel encouraged because of your comment to say it. What I really don't understand is we have a generation of people like you who've not had relationship, sexuality, education, and are now decision makers, and now they think for their own children, that was a really good idea, let's keep it that way. I don't understand that. Yeah. So I agree. There's big gaps, and higher education has absolutely a role to play. Freshers Week is the prime week for sexual abuse and assaults taking place in university. The first week is the week. There were very public cases in England, in Durham, and places like that, but this is a week, and the Students' Union is very much aware of that. They've put resources in place to deal with that, and that's why our students who are staying in the halls of residence in university, and that's the same in Ulster, by the way, have training on bystander behaviour, on support, report and support, helplines and force that are available for them if they have experience like that.
Yeah, I think your comments there just really underscore the need for RSE, when it comes to things like knowing where to go to and how to get advice. But no, that really answers my question. And again,
thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. No other indications. I don't think we have anything from online either. So that is I think that's brought our session to a close. We thank you again for your time. And all of that will
Good luck with decision making.
Fed into the final report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to assume at this stage that we'll just, as with other briefings in this, that'll be fed into the considerations of the report at the end of the inquiry. So that moves us on then to item 7, which is another RSE briefing, and this time it is from the Women's Resource and Development Agency. Can I just check? We have, I think we are getting the witnesses, so we'll just bring them through. But I'll draw members' attention to the briefing from the committee clerk at page 114 and the briefing paper provided by the Women's Resource and Development Agency at page 32. So they're not here yet. Okay. Well, we'll jump on to the next bit of the agenda then, and we can move through that, and then if we get a notice when they are here, we can track back. So if members are content then, as our witnesses aren't here as yet for item 7, we'll move on to item 9, which is correspondence, and if we can get through some of that, we can make a start. So I'd refer members to pages 176 to 507, where we have items tabled for your attention, and item 9.1 is a summary note of that correspondence. So I will go through, as usual, any items where I think that we maybe need a committee decision or discussion. Otherwise, it'll be as per the note, and please feel free to raise anything that I don't highlight that you wish to. So we'll start with item 9.2, and that's page 179, and that's a response from the Department of Education, and that provides a breakdown of the number of SEN pupils provided with placements for this academic year when they actually entered schools, and also there were some questions asked around numbers of allied health professionals available to provide support. So I think it is an interesting response, and I think the thing that I would draw out is while most children were placed, there were through the course of the academic year quite high numbers for a period of time who were not in fact accessing their full place because of, I think I'm going to assume in the main, it was access to appropriate classrooms, and there were still works going on. And as of December, at the point when this letter was written, there were still 13 pupils who were not accessing their full provision. That's a significant proportion of the academic year, and I think even back in October the number was as high as 74. So we obviously, these figures are now not completely up to date, and we may be able to get some information from the EA when they're in, so we can certainly ask that. But I mean, I'm happy to get views on what we do. So Danny, you'd indicated there.
Yeah, and I suppose a lot of it as well was about how children were being supported when they weren't in the place, and how was that even being counted in that data. I don't think we got a clear answer of it. And like just some of the cases I'm having right now is even children who are statemented, who have moved to that, like they only may have a statement of 20 hours, but they include them as that extra hour. We need that extra 5. I'm dealing with a lot of cases with that now, where they're now being rejected, and I'm going, well, how is that even fair? That's still a reduced timetable. So even in the statement process, that's not even being in this. So there's wider questions there, yeah.
Yeah, there's absolutely a lot there, because I think particularly if we're looking at the younger end as well, children maybe moving into P1, really, really critical stage in their educational journey, and if they are already presenting with additional needs, and they're not getting that time in the classroom, I think that's really consumed still. That's fine. That is a concerning picture. So I'm going to suggest, as we're doing the correspondence at this stage, we can probably raise some of these issues with the EA when they're in, so I'd suggest we may want to consider that. But subject to anything that isn't clarified in that session, I would suggest we would maybe want to write and express the concern around just that journey those children have gone on, seek an update on the figures as they stand now, and also some detail around what work's underway to ensure this doesn't happen on September 25. Kathy? Sorry, Deputy Chair first, and then I'll bring Kathy.
Are you coming on that same point about placement? I want to come in on the last part.
The allied health professionals. Yes, okay, no, go ahead in whatever order you're happy.
Yeah, I mean, it seems absolutely crazy to me that they don't have, the Education Department doesn't have numbers. I mean, I would have thought, given the exponential rise in the number of children presenting with special needs over the last number of years, that somebody would be sitting down and saying, well, with this percentage increase, we also need a percentage increase in allied health professionals. And if they don't know how many they have at the minute, how do they work out what they need in the future?
It's
concerning. That's just
that
crazy.
Potentially just entirely relying on what health provide them with without seemingly any engagement. Again, this speaks to the earlier points around the Minister's statement of seeking to engage with health. Maybe the time for seeking is past. Kathy?
No, Pat's said what I was going to say there. It just seems completely crazy that they don't have those figures. Like, we're all engaging with principals and staff in schools who are crying out for allied health professionals to come in and look after these children and support these children, and the very fact that we can't get those figures just defies belief.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest practically, because we want the information, we probably should direct that query to health, so we should be writing to ask for that, and I think it would be the numbers of allied health professionals that are available to support schools, probably broken down regionally, and details of what workforce planning they're undertaking. But I think our correspondence to the department should be asking why do they not have access to these figures. How can we say we're genuinely collaborating if this information is not available? David.
Yeah, I think sure it does come down to getting to the bottom of it's something that I think committee sort of expressed quite a few times. It's getting to the bottom of if there isn't appropriate collaboration, why and who and where is the block to that. I don't want to I understand what you're saying, but don't want to overanalyze the words that the minister used in that regard. But we do need to understand the dynamic there and whether is there a reticence on one side or the other in terms of sharing that information and so on, because it's a theme, I think, and I think it's something we need to pick up on and get the information for.
Yeah, and I think we do have our concurrent meeting with health coming up, and I think again we'll absolutely use that forum to maybe get into some of that in more detail. But I think at this stage we think we've agreement on getting that correspondence away, and we can perhaps see what the EA have to say on it as well when they come in a little later. Okay, so I think we do have all our witnesses available now. If you want to bring those through, so I'd ask members just to track back in the agenda there to item 7. So, Item 7, and it was just to confirm, page 114 is the briefing paper provided by the witnesses, and then page 32 was also the submission that was made to the RSE inquiry from the Women's Policy Group, and that's a page 115 of tabled papers. Apologies. So I'll let everybody get settled, and then we can do introductions. So good afternoon. It's great to have you here, and thank you for giving your time to the committee and its inquiry. So just in terms of who we have presenting today, we have Elaine Crory, who is the Good Relations Coordinator at the Women's Resource and Development Agency, and I know you'd already attended one of our stakeholder events as well, so that's been much appreciated. We also have Meghan Hoyt, Women's Sector Lobbyist with the Women's Resource and Development Agency, and Jonna Monaghan, Project Coordinator with Northern Ireland Women's European Platform. So you're all very welcome. If you want to provide any background and more detail on your roles, please feel free to do that. But we've received your briefing material in advance, so really it is over to yourselves to bring your initial presentation. If we could ask, that could be up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to question and answer from there. And I probably should have said with our previous witness as well, we are grateful to have Hansard here for any of the inquiry evidence sessions, so that there will be a full complete record of these evidence sessions for our consideration of the final report. But over to yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us. I'm just going to start with some corrections of titles there, if that's okay. I'm the Women's Sector Lobbyist. Not good. That's a 5-year-old title. I'm not sure where that came from. Meghan here is the Women's Sector Lobbyist Policy Assistant, and it's Jonna, not Joanna. So sorry about multiple corrections to start with. So I'm just going to start into the presentation, but I'll keep it really brief. Just first of all, to introduce what the Women's Policy Group is. Myself and Meg work at WRDA, the Women's Resource and Development Agency, and we coordinate and we're the secretariat for the Women's Policy Group. But the Women's Policy Group itself is a collection of women working in policy roles, policy experts and practitioners, and we advocate collectively for women and girls by promoting gender equality through an intersectional feminist lens. Our whole role is to challenge systemic injustice and discrimination affecting women and girls by informing society and influencing policy and law. Our work is informed by women and girls' lived experiences and rooted in international human rights law. We're made up of women from trade unions, grassroots women's organisations, women's networks, feminist campaigning organisations, LGBTQ+ organisations, migrant groups, support service providers, NGOs, human rights and equality organisations, and individuals who are unconnected to any of those. Over the years, we've ensured that there's good communication between politicians, policymakers, and women's organisations on the ground. And as I've mentioned, it's chaired by myself at WRDA. And we're really acting as a coalition of expert voices advocating for women in Northern Ireland on a policy level. Our position on RSE is very, very clear-cut. We have been lobbying on this issue for many years, and this is articulated in our response to the committee's inquiry. So the written response, our response to the Department for Education consultation in 2023, our contributions to the draft gender equality strategy, our lobbying of previous education ministers, and in assorted research reports that we've produced over the years. There are 3 main takeaways. I won't labour with you all of it, but just the 3 main things. And one is that RSE is the most vital building block of the work that's needed to tackle violence against women and girls. So we've carried out extensive pieces of research over the years, and one of our main reports in 2022, which had over 1,000 respondents, found that 92% of the people who attended school in Northern Ireland said that they did not feel that they'd received an adequate education on RSE. 87% of the women in Northern Ireland who responded had experienced some form of violence against women and girls. And there's a breakdown of all the different forms in the report. 95% of the women who, when we asked them what they thought would address the levels of violence against women and girls, they said we should focus on changing men and boys' behaviours and actions through education. So it is not just our view as professionals, we are reflecting the views of the people that we work to represent. The importance of education in tackling violence against women and girls emerged as a key theme in the primary research into the scope, scale and prevalence of violence against women and girls. Looking at both our qualitative and quantitative findings, the importance of education stood out as a key recurring theme. This was particularly the case when looking specifically at questions relating to culture in attitudes and beliefs around violence against women and girls, and specifically a high level of respondents felt that sexism, misogyny, victim blaming, rape myths and rape culture are caused by a lack of education. A lack of education on violence against women and girls has perpetuated the existence of stigma around issues related to violence, and in order to change men and boys' actions and address men's violence, it is necessary to educate men and boys on issues relating to violence against women and girls. And many respondents specified that this education should begin at a young age in schools and other learning environments, so youth clubs and the like. A second main takeaway is RSE is a children's rights issue, and that this right must not be blocked or denied by any body, be it this assembly or any other body. Throughout the public debate that occurred around the 2023 Department of Education consultation on RSE, and indeed on the phrasing and scope of the consultation itself, children's rights were framed as something to be contextualised alongside parents' rights, or to be balanced with them somehow. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and specifically Children's Article 5 rights. In the text of the article, parents or carers have responsibility to provide guidance to their child so that they fully enjoy their rights. The right or responsibility of a parent or carer is not designed to be used to frustrate or limit the child's rights. It's important to note as well that in Article 29 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, it's clear that the purpose of education is both the development of the child themselves in all of their unique personality, as well as, quote, the preparation of the child for responsible life in a free society, in the spirit of understanding, peace, tolerance, equality of sexes, and friendship among all peoples, ethnic, national, and religious groups, and persons of indigenous origin, end quote. And this doesn't need balancing against a parent's or a carer's right. A child is a unique person in and of themselves. They hold that right fully, and there is a reason why we have extensive apparatus to protect children in the event that a parent is violating their rights. And then lastly, the third main takeaway is comprehensive, scientifically accurate RSE, including specifically on abortion and contraception, is legally required by Section 9 of Northern Ireland Executive Formation, etc. Act 2019. Specifically, the requirement of the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to implement paragraphs 85 and 86 of the relevant CEDAW report. The relevant section reads, quote, D. Make age-appropriate, comprehensive and scientifically accurate education on sexual and reproductive health and rights a compulsory component of curriculum for adolescents, covering prevention of early pregnancy and access to abortion, and monitor its implementation, end quote. This is therefore a legal requirement, and failure to fully implement it could be challenged in court, and likely will be. As such, it was unnecessary and unhelpful for the Department of Education to consult on the issue of providing appropriate education on abortion in schools specifically, as it did in the autumn of 2023. This approach not only generated a huge amount of controversy around an issue that does not need to be controversial, it also created the false impression that objections from members of the public could stop this legislation from proceeding when it had in fact already passed at Westminster. Separately, the fact that the legislation allows for parents to exclude their child or children from parts of the curriculum, and in particular those parts that address abortion care and contraception, is an issue because, in effect, it deprives some children of their right to this apparently compulsory part of the curriculum, and that's per the phrasing of the legislation itself. So, in essence, that's our submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, apologies for inaccurate titles and mispronouncing the name. That's entirely my error, so apologies. The first question I want to ask, and I actually asked the previous witness as well, so out of the three things that you set out there, the whole issue around tackling violence against women and girls and the role that RSE plays, and that is really prevalent in your evidence. So I'll just ask very directly, what would your assessment be in terms of where the department is at in terms of enacting those recommendations arising from Gillen? So how effectively have we actually followed that up in the educational space?
I mean, honestly, as far as I'm aware, it hasn't been followed up, or at least not as thoroughly as it should be. The curriculum was meant to be ready by January of last year, so a year ago now. And certainly the Department for Education produced their outcome of the consultation and all of those other things in a timely fashion, and I will say they didn't have an awful lot of time to do that, but they produced that. Whether that's actually been rolled out to schools, it is a different question, and to my knowledge it hasn't been fully implemented. So whether it's the case that all children have access to this high quality education right now, I don't believe so.
Certainly in terms of minimum content orders, I'm not aware of anything having been changed. Now there may be other material that has been made available. I know that we had a debate on RSE in the chamber yesterday, specifically around the issue of gender-based violence, and the Minister's statement did suggest that he felt we were very well progressed in terms of the Gillen recommendations, but we didn't get any detail on that. So I think that is I think it's important that we do try and nail that to say what has actually been done, because I think I would agree it's absolutely critical that this education around all of those issues that arose out of Gillen, I think, is delivered in schools consistently. So I would absolutely agree on that. I'll pick up on your final point, and it's not to say that the rights issue is any less important from my perspective. I think we've discussed it at length in the inquiry, and to say that there's not a meeting of minds in the committee is maybe an understatement on that one around it being a rights issue. But in terms of the new minimum content order, and you referenced some of your concerns around the consultation process and parental opt-out, but you've set it out there that content that schools must now deliver around sexual and reproductive health, including prevention of early pregnancy and access to abortion. So similar to my previous question, how effectively, since that law change has come in, would your perception be in terms of how that's being delivered in schools, and what more needs to be done to ensure that we have consistent and effective provision on that new minimum content?
I'm going to say, first of all, and any of my colleagues can come in as well, to my knowledge it's not as good as it could be. There is, I know that the CCEA have worked on some resources which include abortion in a way that haven't been included before, which is positive. Whether it's as thorough as it needs to be is a different question, and I would say it does need some more work. Whether it's reaching all children in all schools is another thing, and then there's this separate issue of those children who are opted out, and indeed the opt-out process itself, which I think is a little bit, I suppose it needs safeguards to make sure that, I mean, our view would be there shouldn't be an opt-out, but there is an opt-out in law, and dealing with that reality, I think that opt-out should be safeguarded a little more carefully. But yeah, to my knowledge, it's not it's not there yet. It's not where it needs to be. We have in legislation that all children should be receiving this education, but they're not. So we are failing to meet our legal duties.
Thank you. And I suppose just to follow on from that on the opt-out specifically, the department has produced guidance around that opt-out in terms of how schools should operate it, and a sort of pro forma letter that can be signed. So I have expressed concerns in this committee that I think it's just sort of, you just rubber stamp it and it's done, and I'm not sure there's meaningful engagement with the young person involved. Would you have any suggestions or proposals around how that could be made more robust to ensure that the voice of the young person is heard in that discussion?
I think we share the same concerns about a parent could sign that and submit that without a young person having seen it or being aware that they're being opted out. I think it is important that the young person knows they're being opted out if they are. And there's also a provision within that where a child at a certain stage in their education, a certain age, is able to override that parental opt-out. And that only works if you can't just tick a box to say my child is okay with this, because a person could do that dishonestly. and the child may not even be aware of it. There are ways of doing it that require, I suppose, it is a burden on schools, but would require the schools to check with the child that they know this and that they're okay with it, especially after that age where the child is allowed in law to override their parental opt-out.
I suppose, and again, just speaking from my own perspective, I mean, I would have liked to see in those provisions something that provided clear guidance to schools about how to have those conversations,
Yeah.
and if the department is serious that this material is important, not just important, it's also compulsory, that it would have been encouraging schools to have those conversations to try and maximise participation. I'm not sure that that's there, but that's something for us to pursue with the department. No, thank you for your answers. I'll open up to members. Deputy Chair, do you want to come in?
Thanks for your presentation and your answers so far, Elaine. And carrying on this particular issue around opt-out, I suppose the question is going to be, given that opt-out is part of the legislation, how do we maximise the number of children who receive RSC? And I'm just wondering if you have any ideas about how that should be done. I mean, I believe, first of all, the department should be monitoring the numbers of opt-outs there are, and if there are particular reasons for those opt-outs. And that means there needs to be clear communication between schools and parents. But I suppose there's also, given the sort of fake news that's out there on social media about the content of RSE, and parents may be afraid, there is a need for communication anyway, so that parents can be informed about what is actually contained within the RSE curriculum. But I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions about, particularly where parents want to opt out, in regard to teaching around abortion or contraception that you mentioned earlier. How can parents be convinced, first of all, that their children should? And, you know, let's be clear, this is mostly a faith-based issue. People from a faith background who don't want their children learning about abortion or contraception. How can those fears be overcome? Or how can they be circumvented in any way? And I'm just wondering if you have any ideas around how that should be done.
I mean, I have some thoughts on that, which is I think that the department itself and the minister could lead from the front a little bit more vigorously. And I'm aware that in the summer of 2023, when some of this furore started to, I suppose, bubble up, it was obviously during the school holidays. And the department did take the initiative to write to schools with information, and I had a child in primary school at the time, and I got a copy of the letter that had gone from the department saying, you know, a lot of this is misinformation, it's not going to affect primary school children, and that's positive and welcome, but I think it could do more. So it could talk more about what is in the RSA rather than just what's not. So instead of just tackling fires, maybe prevention, you know, so information about what the kind of stuff that's covered, and the way in which it's covered. So it is not, and the fact that it's not directive, the fact that it's not directing people to take a certain course of action should they find themselves pregnant, for example. But it's just giving them information about what services are available and what services are legal. It I think probably seems a lot more frightening when you don't know what's in it than when you do. And when you do, you start to realise an awful lot of this, I suppose, cultural war stuff that happens on the internet is actually just exactly that, and it doesn't serve my child, for me or anybody else in my community, to get drawn into it. And it you know, I mean, I can't speak for other bodies outside of what I'm recommending the department do, but I think as well as that, it would be positive to see, and this is just me personally speaking here, it would be positive to see churches stepping into the space a bit too, and if they find that there's a lot of pushback from their congregation or their members, to maybe speak to them and allay some fears. That's my view, but again, it's not necessarily something that's in our document because we don't really make recommendations to churches. But from the department, we've been critical in public and in this our consultation response about how the department did one positive thing at the start and then kind of let it be. So, and that letter, I'm very conscious, went to primary school principals to disseminate to the parents of their children, which is all well and good, but there was nothing positive coming to principals of post-primary schools saying, your child is going to be receiving this curriculum. It's not the curriculum that you're reading about online. Here's what it is. And that would have been really positive. It was very much, I think, left to the schools to fill that gap. And I think the schools maybe would appreciate that guidance too.
Okay, and just you've mentioned the churches there, and we have heard evidence from some of the churches and from other faith-based groups, and some of them have said they're quite happy to deliver RSE, but they want to overlay it with their own moral framework. How would you feel about that?
I mean, that's directive, and I think the purpose of RSE is supposed to be that it's non-directive. It gives you the information, and you are to do with that sort of as you will. And I think I'm uncomfortable with anything that's excessively directive. So, for example, abortion is legally available, but it's wrong kind of messaging would be, I think, excessively directive and potentially shaming.
Do you think schools are capable of delivering RSE in a non-directive way?
I think it's probably easier to deliver it in a non-directive way than in a directive way. I'm not a teacher.
Well, maybe take a Catholic school.
Yeah.
So Catholics are opposed to abortion, as are many other religions. And, you know, is it possible for a school leader, and usually the chair of the board of governors is the parish priest or whatever, to say, right, this is the RSE, we're going to be delivering information about abortion. Do you think the parish priest is going to say, well, that's okay? Or is he going to say, well, make sure that children are told abortion is wrong, it's sinful, it's willful murder of a child or whatever? You know, is that not the situation?
It might be the situation. I think the problem there in that case then is boards of governors being excessively interfering in the curriculum, and I don't think they do that when it's the geography curriculum or the maths curriculum or pick a subject, any subject. I don't think they try to say, well,
but they don't say they'll overlay the delivery of geography classes with the moral framework. That's what I'm saying. You know,
yeah. So they just say that's the geography curriculum, and off you go, and you're the professionals, and you deliver it.
Maybe I can just comment that maybe one way of looking at it, and again, I'm also not a teacher, is to look at RSE as not a thing. It can be delivered through a number of curricula. So the non-directive stuff can be part of biology or science, for example, but there should be an opportunity to then look at the other elements within RE, for example, which again in a Catholic school is relatively straightforward because it has a clear ethos. So you can have those separate conversations between here's what legally is the situation and here's how we might look at it morally.
And even in the SIA, I suppose, draft version of what the curriculum would look like, it, from what I had seen most recently, which is a while back now, it was in the spring of last year, but it was a sort of a draft workup of what it would look like, and it discussed abortion and what it is and how it, you know, it might be some pills or it might be an operation and various things like that. But then it also said, like, there are a number of different reactions a person might have to choosing an abortion, or what are the things a person might consider when they're, so it's putting out there that it's not, that it is a complex thing. It's a complex thing for every individual who chooses it, I suppose. I mean, for some people they don't struggle with the decision, but for some people they do. And it puts that out there as part of what it is. But it, first of all, describes what it is and describes how a person might go about accessing it, be it through a medication or an operation. And then there's a room there for you to have a discussion. But it's not the teacher directing you to believe a certain thing about it. It's opening up the conversation to the class about what might be going on in the mind of a person who is considering abortion.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other indications there, David? Did you want to?
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. I guess first of all, I'm likely, I expect to be on poles apart from your position on some of the more controversial issues. But I do want to say I'm not intending to sort of get into those. We may discuss elements and there may be questions around it, but it's not the intention to have an emotive conversation around this. I do think discussions around this, and leading on from Pat's point, is that, and probably everyone's shaped by their own experience of education, but my experience of going to school that has a Christian ethos is probably that overlay that Pat's talking about. I think was much softer touch, I think, in my experience than religious instruction in the church, for instance, which I think is, and I do think we have to draw that difference. I also agree in terms of engagement with parents. We may be in different sides at times, but I think engagement with parents around whatever is in that curriculum, I think we've heard from a spectrum of different organisations that have come to the committee, is key to building trust with parents, and so that they understand what is being taught to their kids. Just in terms of, again, probably leans on something I've asked a few times to different people in the committee. You talked about, the abortion issue not needing to be controversial. Surely, if we're preparing children for the world ahead, if we will, that there needs to be a recognition that this is. I will have a strongly different opinion on abortion to you, and that is true not just in Northern Ireland but across the wider world. That there's varying views in this. Do you not think some kind of discussion that listens to and respects different views in the room around that kind of thing is helpful in terms of helping a child to understand the world that is around them and the world that they're going into?
I would say yes, but to some degree. But I think maybe the way in which I phrased it, maybe I've not made it clear. I don't mean that abortion isn't controversial for lots of people all around the world, and that some people are campaigning to change laws and some people are campaigning to keep laws, and there's a push and pull there. I didn't mean that. That's a fact. What I meant was it's not controversial that we do in fact have abortion now here in Northern Ireland. It's decriminalised. And that the law says that we must teach children about abortion. That's not controversial. That's what the law says. So there isn't a debate, there aren't people, and I don't think you're saying this yourself, who says, no, the law doesn't say that, or no, it is still criminalised. So that's what I meant by controversial. When the Department for Education opened that question, they made it seem as though if enough people responded and said, no, I don't want that on the curriculum, it didn't have to be there. But it does have to be there. It's in the law. So that's what I meant. That's the issue that's not controversial. Abortion can be controversial, and there'll be lots of people who will feel the law should be changed back to what it was. There will be people who will feel the law should be changed to some midpoint, whatever that might be for them. There are all sorts of feelings about abortion, and that's a separate conversation to what should or must be in the education curriculum by law. And
so it's probably important that children, if we're going to discuss this, understand the context in which abortion sits socially as well.
So with respect, those conversations are already happening in school. So I have 6 children.
I think a lot of the RSE discussions are already happening in school.
So what isn't currently happening is that children are being made aware of what they are able to access and what is sort of legally available within Northern Ireland currently. So in any post-primary school in Northern Ireland currently, children are sitting in an RE class where they will be, and that is how schools deliver a sort of ethical program to students. And those conversations, I can assure you, are absolutely happening within that context. And so while those conversations are happening, the conversations that aren't happening is the factual information about what they are able to access here. So those ethical conversations, that overlay that you talk about, are currently happening in schools. And I don't think anything within the current RE or RSE curriculum would change that.
I imagine even in terms of what that would include, there'd be a difference, in terms of you have access, but people on the opposite side of the argument to yourselves will often use the mechanics of abortion as part of their pro-life argument. Is there a reason schools shouldn't go into that, factually scientific, accurate information, but used in a different way by different sides of the argument? Is there a reason that schools shouldn't go into that if they're going to have abortion discussed in schools?
When you say the mechanics of abortion, what do you...
The procedures in which
I think I received some of that education.
Not a approach necessarily I would use, but I think you can see in a way which something that could be used in different ways.
I think sometimes it's important that accuracy is at the heart of this, right? For the vast majority of people who have abortions, they take a pill and they have a spontaneous miscarriage. or a non-spontaneous miscarriage, an assisted miscarriage, they have it experientially after they taking of the pill. It's identical to a miscarriage. And I think some of the very, very gruesome images that I have been shown and that I was shown when I was a teenager, now we are talking about a while ago, but they're not scientifically accurate, and they also aren't representative of the vast majority of abortions. So I think showing people what happens during abortion, I mean, we don't show people what happens during, treatments for lots of other medical conditions that people might receive treatment for. A lot of medical treatments are gruesome to look at, and I don't think it's necessarily educational. I mean, probably in a medical context, if they're medicine students, they probably need to know. It's
not something I've ever used myself, but I'm just saying that if we're talking about scientific information, there's different ways in which that is used and what the context of that in terms of schools. I do want to get a question in on something slightly away from that issue, which was again touching on something we dealt with in the last issue, which is you like others talk about the ineffectiveness, I guess, of abstinence RSE education, and some pointed to that and critiqued that. But we were saying in the last, there's an age. I think most people would surely agree that there is an age where abstinence is appropriate, or encouragement of abstinence is appropriate. At what level at what age do you think that we should stop having that approach to kids, and we should have what others refer to as a sex positive approach? Because I think there will be some parents that would be alarmed at younger children being taught in that way, or what they perceive that to be. So where do you think that kind of education should start if we're going to do it in that way? It's not something I necessarily would argue for, but for those advocating it, where would it start?
I mean, it's not something that we haven't described a sex positive approach to education, but I think there's two different questions here, I suppose. The first one is, we have a law with the age of consent in it, and I certainly wouldn't be arguing to lower that in any way, shape or form. Absolutely nobody is encouraging teachers to tell students to have sex at any age, below or above the age of consent. Abstinence-based education is a little bit different to what you're like. I suppose it is directive. You are directing children. It is wrong to do this. Not very effective, because when children are raised that way, and adolescents and teenagers and then into young adulthood, they tend not to understand a lot of very important things that good RSE would give them, such as information about contraception and STIs. So you get higher rates of unplanned pregnancy, teen pregnancy, crisis pregnancy. You get higher rates of STIs and all the kinds of things that I don't think anybody wants to high rates of, right? So I think there's a reason why abstinence-based education doesn't work that's very practical, and the evidence has shown this all around the world. But also there's evidence from countries that have really, really robust RSE and have done for decades, like from when I was a teenager, again, a while ago, that has shown that those young people going through that system, they wait longer to have sex for the first time. There are very, very few teenagers having sex at underage. Very few teen pregnancies, lower rates of STIs. So I think actually giving them that information but not directing them one way or the other is important before the incident happens, before they reach an age where they're maybe considering embarking on a physical relationship.
And personally speaking, I actually think that they should have a lot of the information, the contraception and so on. I think people should have that information. I'm very strongly though in favour of the parental opt-out that allows parents to parent their children. We may have a difference in that, but that's not to say. I think we have heard evidence here that the rate of opt-out is very, very low, even amongst those from faith-based background, people who may have challenges with some of the things that are being discussed, still very low in terms of opt-out. It's just we believe enough should be there. But I think a lot of people still do believe, they still see the world that their child is growing up in and still think they should have that information. But I know we have different opinion, but I would have a difference of opinion on the opt-out, but it doesn't necessarily mean that on a personal basis people would not take the decision to allow their child to be informed about some of these things. That we'll have a difference of opinion on abortion, but that's
Absolutely, I see what you're saying, but if I can just say very quickly before...
Just to draw a line on this this question, but that's fine. Yeah, if you've got, please finish.
Extremely carefully. I don't think any of this is preventing parents from parenting their children. You know, like I have a teenager who will get this education in school, but I've been talking about issues around this, not as detailed because she's not at that age yet, you know, but you build up over years. My worry is not for her. She's going to be fine. She's got school and she's got her parents at home. My worry is the first boy she goes out with and the second boy she goes out with, if you know what I mean. They might not be getting those conversations.
I think there's that tension between parent and state and where that line is, and I think my line would be slightly different. But I do think you one thing I will expect different motivations. But
I'm going to ask you just to draw this to an end.
Talk about churches speaking in that space. I think churches do need to step up and make sure that they're talking about some of these issues in their own environments as well to young people. So I think that's right. But
just conscious time's going to beat us here. Cara, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for being here. I just have one quick question, which is included in your response. There you touched on the importance of RSE, including things around emerging issues. Obviously, we know our technology is becoming more advanced. Yesterday, we talked about deepfake legislation, and I suppose, you know, looking at violence against women and girls in that space and things like new apps, even with young people using apps like Snapchat, which has, you know, so many secretive sort of loopholes in it. So sexually explicit images shared without consent is a massive topic. We hear it from teachers, we hear it from principals. So my question to you is, do you think we're focusing enough as a committee in general and in this mini RSE inquiry around things like online misogyny, image-based sexual abuse, and do you have any recommendations around this matter you'd like to share further?
I don't want to criticise the committee, but I would love to hear you focus on it more. It's a huge issue. I watched the debate yesterday and the contributions, and I'm very aware of some of the things that have been experienced by people in this room. I think that we don't know that's still the tip of the iceberg. There are 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds who probably know more what's happening than any of us adults do, and they'll know. You know, there'll be another thing coming along next year. Emerging issues are a huge thing that we are concerned about, and it was something that we spoke about a lot when writing the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. The Andrew Tates, right? In a couple of years' time, Andrew Tate will be out of date and possibly in jail. But there'll be somebody else coming in behind him, and there already are. There's loads of them. And they know how to speak to young men and they're dripping the most dangerous poison into their ears. There will be more of them. It is a profitable endeavour to do, right? There's the kind of narratives they're giving out there are driving the kind of behaviour that we see, like the AI images, like the deep fake images, but also like the real images that they're manipulating and pressuring girls into giving them, and that they hold over their head. Now that's a crime now, but I mean, something being a crime isn't enough to stop it from traumatising the victim before it ever gets to prosecution or any other kind of resolution. I think the problem is huge. I think we don't have a clue of the scale of it. I have done some, we do some training at WRDA called Raise Your Voice, and I've been in with groups of young women, and I mean, they don't even know what some of the laws are. Mentioned that image-based sexual abuse, or what people sometimes call revenge pornography, is now illegal, and that anybody under the age of 18 should not be taking, receiving, sending messages like this. And every face in the room dropped. They were shocked. They had no idea. And they've all received them, and many of them have been pressured into sending them. It's a huge problem. We don't have a clue of the scale of it. And I would love to hear more from young people about what they think could protect them. But we'll need to keep doing this. Like, you know, I know this mini inquiry is a mini inquiry, but in 5 years' time, it'll be, like I said, a different set of problems. So we need to be hearing from young people all the time.
Yeah, and just very, very briefly, can just add to that. I think in our response to this, we emphasize that it's relationship and sexuality education. And throughout, you know, right from a young age, I think the relationship part can't be forgotten, because it's about working with all young people from a very young age. You know, what are healthy relationships? What is decent behavior towards other human beings? Because, I mean, evidence from across the world shows that there's issues with rising levels of misogyny among young men and so on. And unless we take action now, problems will go a bit worse.
Yeah, because I think, you know, looking even at the minimum content order and looking previously, it was so outdated, and now we're having social issues, technological advancement we've never seen before, and some of the algorithms, particularly on apps like TikTok, reward certain activities or certain type of dances, and young people feel pressured, as you say, to replicate that behaviour, to do well and to gain views. So I think we're really up against it here with our young people, and I think that's just something we as a committee really need to be mindful, because we know that teenagers never have phones out of their hands as well, so no, that's really helpful. Thank you all very much for your work here today.
Thank you. Thank you again for your time. And as I said, we have a full Hansard record now of that evidence session. And I think some of those points there around the technological challenges that exist in this space, I think are important that we do note those in terms of our work going forward. As there's undoubtedly challenges that we're not ahead of in the educational space on that. So that was a helpful note to close on, I think. But thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you later.
I'm just going to suggest, I think, in the main, we're just submitting these evidence sessions on and for further consideration for the writing of the final report. The one thing I wouldn't mind just suggesting we write to the department on would be around specifically the Gillen recommendations, just to get an update from the Minister, maybe just to break down what were those recommendations specifically, to set those out that pertain to education and exactly what work has been done and is ongoing. Are we agreed that would be a reasonable action? Yeah.
Sure, I was going to suggest, just off the back of the first briefing that we had, I don't know how other members might feel, but perhaps is there a space for us, I know it falls under economy, further and higher education, but could we write to the universities in Northern Ireland and just identify if they have, and they talked, first professor talked at length about, Queen's has really stepped up. I do know there's a fantastic initiative in Ulster OMFG consent, so it's really, really good. But I just would love to know what we're doing and where the gaps are, just if those generations moving through the schools haven't received comprehensive RSE, maybe there is a problem solving outside of that we can look at or collaborate on.
Yeah, I mean, it technically falls out of our remit. I would suggest further education colleges as well. I think on the back of this inquiry, it would be a reasonable question to ask what measures are in place at the universities and in the further education colleges. So if members are agreed, I think that's an appropriate thing to do.
You can ask via the economy committee as well, just to give them their place. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
No,
absolutely.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so that moves us on to the next item 8. Can I check in, or are we probably all ready for a bit of a comfort break just for 5 minutes, and then we'll bring the witnesses through? All right. Thanks.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Yeah.
Okay, members, that is us back in open session, and that takes us on to item 8 of our agenda, and that's an Education Authority leadership and operational update. It's an oral briefing, and I'd refer members to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 129. A briefing from the Education Authority at page 36 of tabled papers, and then we also, if members are interested in asking any questions around that, we have our Assembly research paper on school governance, which will cross over with the EA functions, and that's at page 131. So just while the witnesses are brought through, we'll let them get settled, and then we will make a start. Good afternoon, everybody. Just take a seat and we'll make a start. Okay, so just while everyone's getting settled, just thank you all for giving us your time this afternoon. It's good to have you here. Joining us today from the EA, we have Richard Pengelly, the Chief Executive of the Education Authority. We have Hanna, Director of Children and Young People Services at the EA. And we have Elaine, who is the Interim Assistant Director within Children and Young People Services with responsibility for SEN statutory services. So there's probably not much for me to say at this stage other than to welcome you here and to hand over for any initial remarks or presentation that you want to make. We've received your briefing material. So if I could ask any opening remarks of up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answers from members. So over to yourselves.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'll try not to take the full 10 minutes. I think probably the time's better spent on discussion and questions. Yeah, you have the paper. I mean, the session, I think, was quite wide-ranging, talking about sort of leadership and operational challenges. I was really just, by way of opening remarks, give you a sort of overview of what I've been doing and it's 9 months today in post. So just give you a sense of that, and then I think we'll just follow the question from there. So 15th of April, when I took up post, one of my priorities coming into a sector I hadn't worked in before was just to get to know the organisation, to get to know the people, and to get to know the stakeholders. So I've spent a considerable part of my time over the last number of months getting out to as many schools and youth facilities and meeting stakeholders, getting across the organisation and meeting staff. In terms of the specific challenges, in terms of dialogue with the department at my point of entry, it was clear that obviously SEN was a specific challenge, and the Minister's statement this week covered a lot of ground. We'll probably touch on it, so I'll not say too much now. One of the big issues that was highlighted to me, there was a really poor working relationship between EA and the Department of Education. I agree with the department. I wasn't going to spend any time trying to understand why the relationship was poor, but let's just try and recalibrate that and make it better. So we looked at that. There's obviously a whole range of financial challenges which we've worked on. Certainly it was clear to me in terms of the media narrative that attached to EA in my early days. Staff morale across the organisation was in a very bad state. It was an organisation that in many ways had been beaten into submission. And to be fair, the organisation hadn't done a lot to help itself. So that was a key issue. Another issue was just we weren't great at stakeholder engagement and actually capturing the views of the people we were using to provide services and the people we were providing services to. So that shaped the ground in terms of areas that we wanted to focus on. So in terms of a sort of quick run through what I would say are some of the achievements, can I preface this by saying I want to talk, I think we've made some really good achievements over the last 9 months. I want to be very, very clear. The single biggest contribution I have made to that is helping people better tell the story of what they've been doing. The people in the organisation have been doing this and have been striving for excellence. So I don't want to convey any sense that I am the game changer in terms of better performance in EA. It's the people and it's the colleagues that are with me today that have led the charge in that. So we made good progress. The SEN placements issue last year was better than it has been. It is not as good as we want it to be and is not as good as people demand it should be, so we have more to do. And part of that was with better collaborative work with colleagues in the department, and we work better with parents and other stakeholders in terms of communicating what we were doing. In terms of the financial challenge, we're on target for a balanced budget this year. We're not there yet. The department set us a target of £15 million of savings in this year. Thus far, we've delivered about 25. It was really important to me that we actually over-delivered in terms of what the department wanted from us. And that's a contribution that's been recycled within the education budget to providing services, been a contribution to the pay issues, which members will only be too aware about. I've worked closely with the department. There were some very historic and caustic issues with the pay mechanism for assistant directors and directors. one of the obvious manifestation of that was there are 5 directors on my senior management team. 4 of them are interim appointments because we can't recruit. Now, taking the organisation forward, it's essential that we have those substantive appointees. So just before Christmas, I secured both Department of Education and Department of Finance approval to a new mechanism to address those pay issues. The next stage in that is some consultation with trade union colleagues and the staff that are affected. I'm hopeful that in the next number of weeks we'll get through that, and that will allow us to go to the market and start to recruit and fill those posts on a substantive basis. We've also reviewed the leadership structure across the organisation. The Minister touched on this in a statement. One of the things that I want to do will be recruiting a senior level post with a specific focus on SEN transformation and reform, to bring that real energy at the top of the organisation to something that is both a ministerial priority and an organisational priority. We've done some work before Christmas in terms of facilitated focus group discussions to capture the input and views of school leaders, both about the services we provide and where we could improve that. We're currently designing what I call a baseline stakeholder survey. So it's a comprehensive survey that will go out to the school network to actually find out how they find the services we provide. That's something I want to repeat every year. I want those stakeholder views to influence how we design the services we provide and how we work in partnership to do that. And school leaders have been really engaged and proactive in working with us in that. We've made really good progress in resetting the relationship with the department. It now feels more like a partnership. We're not there yet. I would caveat with saying I doubt that across any sector the relationship between the sponsor department and arm's length bodies is perfect in any scenario, but we've made some progress. There's room for a bit more. I'll just finish then with a few points of what's next. The Minister's statement this week on special education needs, we're now working, and Dale will probably want to say a bit more about it in the course of the discussion. We're working flat out with departmental colleagues on developing and finalising the delivery plan. The Minister has made it explicitly clear to us that he's very keen to get that finished and published as soon as possible, so we're working flat out on that. I touched on stabilisation of the leadership team, recruiting new structures. At the point EA was created, 10 years ago, we produced a 10-year interim strategic vision. We're doing some work to reshape that. I want to link that to the departmental vision, but actually want to better understand and articulate what is our strategic ambition. I find a lot of times in the education sector, we rush headlong into a process or an operational issue without actually thinking about where do we want to land this strategically. So that work started. I should say in support of that this year we recalibrated the way we produce our business plan, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but one of the elements in the business plan was a renewed focus on that stakeholder engagement and actually bringing in the views of the people we're delivering services to as part of that. Well, there's a programme of work which we're calling service reviews. So there's something in the region of about 70 to 80 different service lines within the Education Authority, which are products and services we deliver. We're reviewing each of those with a view to improving its efficiency and effectiveness. Asking the question, in a time of constrained financial challenge, do we really need this service at this point in time? Want to make sure the answer is yes. And if the answer is yes, the next question is there a better way that we can provide this? So we're doing a sort of paper-based review, but we're also, as a senior management team, meeting with each of the service leads to talk through those issues. Key question is, what other parts of the organisation can you collaborate with to make this a more effective service? So that will be a really promising piece of work. And then finally, we're working with the department just to develop a longer term, what we're calling a priority improvement plan. There's loads and loads of areas where we need to up our game and improve. There's always a risk that if you try to do everything, you'll actually do nothing. So we want to get that in a prioritised list and know what's the most important things. So the first year will be a combination of the big strategic issues which have the biggest impact, plus some quick wins, because I think it's important to capture the momentum, and we'll put together a year 2 list and a year 3 list and start to take that forward. So that was a pretty quick gallop through lots of stuff, and then happy just to move into questions, Chair. So I hope that was helpful.
No, absolutely, and thank you for that. And I think probably everybody's eager just to get into the questions, and your briefing material was also very helpful. So probably Richard, for yourself as CEO, just to direct certainly the first question to you. And I mean, you've set out the range of challenges there that you were faced with, and I think when you first came to committee, you were very clear you didn't really have your feet under the table at that stage, and weren't maybe necessarily able to cover all of the issues in detail. We're obviously ahead of that now, and conscious that you were appointed with a very clear directive from the Minister with a transformational agenda. Now that was something that was very, very clear in the Minister's statements around your appointment. And you have set out some of those challenges, obviously saying, and I've no doubt we will come to saying, departmental relations. Positive to hear those are being reset. I think in the interest of the system operating well, those relationships need to be good, so no argument with that. No argument around the level of financial challenge or the morale issues. Again, I think it's important that those are addressed. I think for me, the one that really stands out is the stakeholder engagement, and that's around effectively what I would call your customers, the people who are using your services, so schools and pupils. And if we can think about schools first, I mean, my engagement with school principals when I go out to see them, and when I speak to teachers, and when I speak to Senkos is another one at the moment where we get a lot of feedback. What I hear is they feel like they spend a really disproportionate amount of their time chasing the EA to be able to access the services that they need, be that maintenance, be that whatever aspect of pupil support they're trying to access, rather than doing the job of educating children or leading their schools. So in terms of how you're going to address that, because that is the feedback that we receive consistently, and I'm not making any judgment as to why that may be the case. I have no doubt your organisation is massively under-resourced, and I know that your staff really struggle, I think, just to meet the sort of the basic statutory requirements. But that is the feedback I hear around those stakeholders that you engage with, that they just don't feel that they can easily access the services, and when they access them, I'm thinking particularly around maintenance, they don't always feel that the outcome is effective. They feel their interactions with contractors are suboptimal, shall we say. I give that by way of example. So what are you going to do to address that, so that in a year's time we speak to principals, they say actually our interactions with the EA are really positive, we get the services we need when we need them, and we're not the ones chasing, we ask and it's provided. What can you do to address that?
I mean, firstly, just to say, Chair, I think the points you made are very, very fair criticism in terms of, I've been out through lots of schools, I've met groups of school leaders, I've heard the same comment. When you say what are we going to do to fix it, I met with a group of school leaders, I think it was about the end of November, early December, and I'm delighted to say what I was hearing from them is it's starting to feel better. And again, starting to feel better is good, but I don't want to become complacent. It's not where we need to land at. The reality is, if you take school leaders, school principals in particular, they're highly experienced, highly expertise group of individuals. My view is they should spend their time doing the things that only their skill set can do. They shouldn't spend their time in basic administrative tasks. And spending an hour in the morning trying to find who is the right person in the Education Authority to speak to is not a good use of their time. I think it's Annex B to the written material I submitted. It was an example of a letter I'd sent to a principal. That was illustrating some really good progress we have made in terms of the recruitment, because one of the concerns from schools was that recruitment was taking too long, and you can see some of the change. That was one letter we picked. There's a separate letter that went out before Christmas too, that was articulating the implications of a new help desk we've put in place. So we have an aspiration now that we have a single point of contact, and the vast majority. Now, some queries from schools will always be complex and will require more engagement, more detail. The vast majority of them, it should be a one-touch engagement. So we've started to put that in place. We've got, and I can send through to the committee the note that went out showing the benefits of that. I want a situation where we take receipt of the school problem, and then as an organisation we take it away and come back with a solution. It's not, well, that's not me, you need to go and speak to Joe or someone else, which I think has happened in the past. So there's a very clear agenda to improve that. I don't know.
Maybe pick up on the Senko, because you're absolutely right, Chair. Those they really do need to get in touch with their services. So I suppose just advising that, that we're introducing the local integrated teams the Senko portal is about to go live this month in the next couple of weeks. That in itself will be the opportunity and the ability, the mechanism for Senkos to more easily access information. One of the other things we've done around there is that obviously as part of that we've reduced the EP role in terms of gatekeeping accessing services. So again, we've removed that barrier for Senkos. And then finally there will be, once we get the fully integrated local impact teams up in place, there will be dedicated teams to wrap around X number of schools. And alongside that, a little bit like the HR helpline, that's currently being developed, that there will be a very bespoke helpline for both Senkos and school leaders to be able to access those stage 1 and stage 2 services. So there's real live tangible work just happening at the moment to help improve that for Senkos.
And can I on the local impact teams, I think it's a good example, and I think principals, Senkos in particular, would speak about really feeling that they get the runaround, sometimes just trying to get the right service and support in. And I've seen the information about the local impact teams and how they're going to be rolled out, and also noting that the rationing of ed psych provision is coming to an end, that effectively if schools feel they need an ed psych referral, they are free to make that. And on the one hand that's very welcome, but some of the concerns I'm hearing is, are we just going to open the floodgates to a sort of tsunami of demand that you can't manage, because you may be streamlining how you deal with those queries differently, but it's the same number of staff involved and the rise in levels of demand. So process might be improved, and I think schools would welcome that sort of one-touch interaction. You ask, tell us once and we'll get the right services, but do you actually have the resource in terms of the people you need to meet the level of demand? My sense would be you don't, but I'd be very, very interested to hear how you would assess that.
I think there's two bits to that, Chair. I think there is potentially a risk that there could be a tsunami of requests coming through from schools, but I think in terms of the analysis we've done, we would welcome that, because at least to date there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that there's going to be a demand. I think at the very outset, what that will definitively do will help to identify what the demand is, and if there's a huge increase in the demand, then clearly we're going to be able to start to analyse that, look at it, be able to articulate that, and maybe make the case for additional funding for those types of services. So yes, potentially that could happen. I think the other thing that what it will allow us to do is allow that information to come in about those pupils, and allow our teams to start triaging that information. And maybe triaging is not the right word, but allow us to look at those pupils and the profile of the pupils and decide how best to support those pupils. So we're kind of going in with our eyes wide open a wee bit around that, Chair. I think there is the potential that we could see an increase in demand, but we think at the very least we're going to start to be sighted on the actual real needs of the children and young people out there to be able to start to manage that further downstream.
You understand the concern. I think what I'm hearing from a lot of school leaders is that they think that they've been asked to do the rationing up to now, and I think they're worried that the rationing is just going to happen at your end rather than theirs. So it's really, to me, is at what point does the flag need to go up? We don't have enough people. Look, my sense from interacting with your services, especially in the SEN space, is, and the issue of SEN link officers was well rehearsed a number of months ago. My sense is you don't have enough people to deliver the services, and that is no criticism of the people delivering the services. In fact, I interact with Elaine and her team regularly. I'm sure everyone around this table does. No question about the level of commitment among those staff to the children that they're trying to provide service for. But there's just not enough of them. And I think that is sometimes where the reputational damage comes in, because it then feels like you've got an organisation that doesn't care if it's stretched too thin. So I suppose for me my concern is that if we raise expectations this is going to get better, and we end up with a bottleneck just in a different place, that we don't move things on. So I'm just really wanting to get a sense of how are you going to make sure we don't end up on that scenario, and we can deliver the real change schools need to feel in this space.
Well, look, we can't shy away from the fact that there absolutely is a pressure on resource, and that could well continue to manifest itself, but we will continue to make the case through the Department of Education. I think the introduction of the local impact teams, though, is a great lever around which we can build other services, for both in a multidisciplinary way with health colleagues, but also as well in terms of I've kind of lost my train of thought there. We were talking about
Can I say
yeah.
Is that okay, Chair? We have had an increase in SEN link officers and SEN support officers since probably the last time you were here, and that has made a difference. Now, would we want more resource? Yes, kind of, but at the same time, Actually, the greatest resource should be at the earlier stages in the code of practice, and that's where our pupil support services, aka the impact teams, the local impact teams, are. And I think it's important that we collect the data when this happens, so we know what the need is. But the other side of that is we have a lot of different pupil support services with different referral pathways, and we could have situations where children could be referred to 2 or 3, and now we won't be in that situation where it will be whoever is the best placed person to meet the needs of that child will be involved.
And just to add the bit that I'd forgot about, but Elaine picked it up. The local integrated teams are fundamental to the success of the SEN reform agenda. That's the piece that I wanted to say. That is absolutely critical. It's one of the key pieces about how we shift everything left, and that we move those services left so that we have less pressure on those more interventative services, that we deal with the issues that children present at a much earlier stage.
If I could just to follow on with that, I know, Richard, maybe you were looking to commit. Do you want to add to that just before?
Well, it's just sorry, I don't want to prolong this, but just very briefly, I also don't want to give people false comfort that we're making a change, and we're not going into that thinking this change will solve. It's not a silver bullet. It's not. We are under-resourced, as you rightly say. We will continue to be under-resourced. The question for me is we need to maximise the use of all our resources, and so there's a piece of work on the delivery plan in terms of saying re-engineering how we do this. There's re-engineering the other bits of the business. And that's why I focused on the service reviews. There are some things we need to identify that at this point in time, given the burgeoning demand for SEN, maybe just aren't as important as meeting the needs of children with special education needs. And in an environment where there isn't sufficient resources, we need to be brave enough to say we're going to pause doing that for a couple of years so we can divert the resources. Managing the pressures at a local level, and sorry, Chair, you'll know this, but if you ask schools to manage this, and if every school gets to deal with their top 10 priority cases, the reality is in any given school, their 11th case could be much more important than the second or third. So at least removing that individual management, we'll have full sight of the total demand, and we'll be able to do some more strategic prioritisation. So this won't solve the problem. It'll give us a better handle on it and help us work towards a solution.
I certainly know many Senkos will not be sad to see the end of the conversations with parents that I'm sorry I don't have a referral for you because we've reached our quota. That's not a conversation anybody wants to be having, but I do have concerns around a bottleneck arising elsewhere, but we'll see how that moves forward. Been very clear that you're not resourced to the level that you need to be, and we will be raising that with the Minister when he's here, because I think this is not about protecting EA budgets. It's about making sure that children who need services and schools who need services can get them. Final question from me, and then I'll open up to members. I'm just sticking with those local impact teams. Much has been made, and we've had it rehearsed in this committee around the absence of health in that setup, and I don't pretend for a minute that is within your gift to bring health to the table. That's a lot of other factors need to come to play. But my sense would be that if this is going to work and meaningfully work, and you're going to have a genuine collective response to a need being presented from a school, you need health at the table. And when we're talking about SEN, I mean, from your engagement on this, how far away are we from getting health around the table meaningfully to be integrated as part of those teams? Because my sense is that we had correspondence from the department earlier. They don't even know how many allied health professionals are available to provide services to schools. They don't know. I mean, that to me is, I think we were all scratching our heads when we read that correspondence. So for me, health is just consistently what comes up on these conversations as the missing piece. So can you give us a sense where this is at?
Elaine can maybe talk. There's two levels of dialogue with health. There's the strategic dialogue, which is sort of shaping the policy environment, which we're not completely sighted on. That's the Department of Education and the Department of Health, and that's happening to try and reset the rules of engagement. There's an operational level engagement that Elaine's very close to. The stark reality is, and we can talk about the pressure in the education system, certainly, I mean, I've lost sight of the detail of it from past times we would have talked at length about it. The health sector isn't short of its own problems, and there's a big resource. certainly the sense we're getting is there is an ambition and a desire on the part of our colleagues in the health service to work with us to do this, but they have their own resourcing challenges. But do you want to talk about that particular?
I think just in the local impact teams, I think it would be important to say that they are going to be coterminous with the health trust. So I think that is important because our services as they stand now.
Can I just to make sure, just in terms of coterminous, what do we mean when we say that?
They're going to be it'll be the teams. So there'll be a team that will be in line with Belfast Health and Social Care Trust, a team in line with Northern Health and Social Care Trust.
Not coterminous with actual health professionals. Just located.
Well, so they'll be located.
They'll reflect the area.
So it'll be the same people who will be interacting with the same health professionals. So I think that's positive in terms of, relationship building and knowing who you're working with, and that wouldn't be the case at the minute across the EA. So I think that's a first positive, and then. All of our services would link directly with health, obviously around SEN and other matters on a day-to-day basis. And there are those more long-standing meetings that would happen, for example, our monthly meetings with the child development clinics around, referrals that need to come in for statutory assessment.
I suppose if I add, I think what we've attempted to do, Chair, is recognise that maybe where we are is a little bit ahead of where health is in terms of us transforming and reorganising our service. So as Elaine has said, we believe we've forward-sighted ourselves, and we've decided to structure ourselves to match trust structures so that at the point health is ready to join up with us, we've made it easy for that to happen. So in a sense, it's a bit like that computer analogy, plug and play. So we're developing the platform which all the other agencies, services should be able to easily plug into what we're doing and be part of that. So look, health understand and know where we are. And I think they agree with the philosophy in terms of what we're doing around that. So look, we think we've put ourselves in a good place to make it easier for health to come in and join us around those multi-integrated teams, and we will continue to have those conversations. I mean, as director, my big challenge is reorganising our own services at this stage, as I suppose stage one of that. And then the second bit is how do we build those teams so that other services and other agencies can join in, and it can be truly a multi-impact team as opposed to just EA services.
And I think just in terms of the resource position, Chair, you can easily fall into the trap of saying the problem is one of resourcing, and until we get more money we can't fix the problem. I think what we're trying to do is make the service a much more investable proposition. If we're going to secure additional investment from the executive into these services, we need to develop a model that we can take to them and say, every pound you put into this service will create the maximum impact and the value return on it. That hasn't always been the case, and pouring more and more money at a time of constraint into a flawed model, that's not going to be attractive to the executive because they want the biggest impact. So that's part of what we're doing.
Absolutely, look, and we hope to see progress in this area. I'll finish with a comment. I met a principal, and I will not name the school, who was discussing the access in their school to speech and language therapy. They gave an answer that's not always the common one, saying our access is actually really good. And I said, well, how has that come about? He said, because it just so happens that one of the teachers has a really good relationship with the team and knows the speech and language therapist, and they work well together. So it's kind of just come about like that, and I feel very grateful that I've got a staff member who's doing that. That's not how services should be run, and children shouldn't be reliant on that lottery, and fair play to that teacher who's reached out and made those relationships, but we should be able to have predictable access to service when children need it. But I'll leave it at that. Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Richard, for your answers so far. And I want to pick up on the point Nick has already made around the response from the department saying that they didn't know how many allied health professionals there were in the system, what their disciplines were, or where the gaps were. And I'm just wondering, does the EA have any of that information?
Is that a point of detail that you...
I wouldn't have the detail on it now, but I could certainly check and get back to committee.
Okay, because you see, we all know that there has been an exponential rise in the number of children presenting with special needs over the last number of years, and the projections are that those numbers will continue to rise. In fact, in a statement to the Assembly the other day, the Minister outlined how the budget is going to have to increase for special needs in our schools. And you know, you talked about working strategically, Richard, and if you're going to work strategically around providing support for children with special needs, we need to know, first of all, what their needs are. Who can provide for those needs? Is it behavioural therapists, occupational therapists, speech and language, and all that wraparound support that's needed? And unless somebody sits down and starts thinking strategically about what is needed, because to me it beggars belief that the department doesn't know how many they have or how many they need or where the gaps are. And that to me is, first of all, there's no strategic thinking, and secondly, there's absolutely no collaboration with health. Now, I acknowledge what has been done in regard to placements for children with special needs over the past short while, particularly since you came into post, notwithstanding some of the challenges that still exist. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was in terms of placements. But, and here's the crux of it, unless the appropriate support can be provided for those children who are going into SPIMS and into special schools and so on, the problem isn't resolved. It just gets worse. And, you know, I wonder, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, and I wouldn't disagree with anything you've said. If you take it's difficult to give an answer today as opposed to sort of map out a roadmap to how we might fix this. But if you take the combination of the Minister's statement earlier this week, the work that's going on in terms of the delivery plan, the work that I'm doing in terms of reshaping the organisation, that we're going to create a director level post. So that's a direct report to me that will have specific personal responsibility for SEND transformation and making this a high value service. And you know, it is very welcoming that from your perspective you're seeing some improvement on the ground. You're absolutely right, we've a long way to travel. But the point that Dale and I and Elaine talk about, dealing with the SEN issue has to be a lot more strategic and significant than every year trying to deal with the issue about SEN placements. The first thing we need to do, and this will be part of the work that the Minister will publish alongside the delivery plan, we need to think about what is the ultimate outcome, what is it we're aspiring to for children with a special education in need. Because at the moment I don't think we have the clear outcome measures and understand what we're shooting for. Once we do that and we articulate that, we need then to completely re-engineer the end-to-end process, and that starts with the earliest possible intervention. That's why the dialogue with the health service is so important, because we think we can even, and there was talk about this fabled shift left, the health service will have better transparency about children that are likely to present with a special education need earlier in their journey than we will have. So it's about trying to assemble all those building blocks. The numbers will always be fluid and always change, so it can always be an easy alibi to say to change so much is very difficult ever to know. We can, in broad brushstrokes, we will know what the position is, and you're absolutely right to say we need to get a better handle on that. We need to better calibrate the supply of services alongside the likely demand in services and to re-engineer that. So I can talk for hours about how important that is to us and the processes we're going to put in place to deliver that. Until we get the delivery plan, until we get the restructuring of the organisation and that very, very granular focus on that, it's difficult to give you what you're really asking for was, tell me the detailed actions that you're going to take forward on a day-to-day basis to make this better. We will be able to come back to you with that. We're just not there yet, and we're continuing to work on it.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to seeing that when it's ready. I want to move on to the controlled sector, because I know you were part of that review into the controlled sector, and you're clearly aware of the Minister's plans to set up a managing authority for the controlled sector. Can you give us an update on that?
I can give you something of an update. The task force, the Minister launched a task force that was chaired by Mark Baker from the Controlled Sector Organisation. So that met, and I was part of that task force. The Minister was very clear and published the terms of reference, which was to basically set out a roadmap as to how that might be delivered. That work completed before Christmas. Mark Baker delivered his report to the Minister, and that still sits with the Minister who's considering it. So I think the next stage, at the risk of speaking for the Minister, will be he will conclude his own thinking in terms of the report that he's received, and then he will say something, I suspect, shortly about what the next steps in that are.
Okay, and one of the reasons the Minister has given for his plans to set up this new managing authority is that the EA hasn't been cutting the mustard when it comes to providing support to the controlled sector, which is their responsibility, your responsibility as the boss. So would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree. There's a strong perception out there that we haven't been delivering that. I think we would hold our hands up and say in some areas. I touched on my opening remarks that some of the work we'd commissioned were facilitated focus groups in terms of actually what is this service offering and how good, bad or indifferent is it. That was, as a first stage, primarily focused on facilitating that piece of work in the control sector, so it lent more into the control space. One of the things that comes out of that is some of the criticism about the quality of services is because there's actually a misunderstanding about the services that we provide, and it isn't, people are concerned about an EA service that actually isn't an EA service. So there's a fair bit of noise in there, but I want to be clear, we haven't performed as well as we could have, or as well as we're capable of performing. So we will improve our game, but it's not. Part of it is resourcing, part of it is we're stretched, and part of it too is that colleagues in EA have always adopted the position that if a school has a difficulty and they reach in for support, we offer it to them. In some cases, arguably, if that's not a control school, our response should be, we don't have responsibility for that, so we can't help you. Thus far, we've always actually, because ultimately, if the school isn't able to resolve its problem, we're the last resort and we will pick up the pieces ultimately. I think we need to recalibrate that and be clear about what support is available and who should provide it. But the core point is, this is part of our wider improvement plan. We need to get better. We need to do that in dialogue, and that's why the stakeholder survey is so important to me. Understanding the view from school leaders about the quality of services we provide, that's a two-way information exchange. We need to provide better clarity to them about some of the services that they're frustrated they're not getting don't come from us, and they need to look elsewhere for them.
Yeah, and nothing's ever perfect. There's always room for improvement, but I didn't pick up whether you agreed or disagreed with the Minister.
I agree. I don't accept the view that we have failed the control sector. I think our services aren't as good as they could have been, but I think we have provided some very, very high quality services given the constraints that are on us to the control sector. So I'm uncomfortable with the failure word. I'm absolutely accepting and comfortable with the word we could do better.
Okay, fair enough. And one final question, Chair, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
We all know the EA is under-resourced, but you're handing 10 million back to the department when you don't have to. Explain that to us.
10 million, so.
Well, you said you've identified 25 million of efficiency savings when the department only asked for 15.
Yeah, but sorry, no, I'm not handing. Sorry if I've misled you. I'm not handing that back. We were at a point in time where we were many tens of millions of pounds. We were in the trajectory to overspend by that amount. So we have delivered savings so that we actually bring it down, so we will only spend the money we have been allocated and we won't overspend. As you know well, public sector organisations must live within their budget. So those savings are designed to allow us to live within budget. It's not about handing money back.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Chair. Deputy Chair. Danny, you had indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your time. I suppose I'm going to bring us right back to the placements. I know early intervention is key, and it does worry me a wee bit that you're on a pathway and health still aren't their deal, and you're creating a platform there for them to fit in when they choose to fit in. That's worrying, but placements to me is also early intervention and getting that right placement at P1, and it's something that I'd raised a number of times around, and I heard the Minister say it on Monday, was the send first approach and the removal of supernumerary. I'm just wondering how that operationally is going to work out maybe for this year coming, that the children will be placed at the same time as their peers.
Well, they won't. I mean, the reality is for the same children, they won't be placed at the same time of the peers because the process runs.
Different process. I mean, so I suppose at that high level, it's important to establish, we'll do our best to align what we can, because obviously there's the natural transition points because the school year operates in a particular cycle, but ultimately, and so for mainstream children, they apply at X point in the year, and then there's processes that work through to the 1st of September. For children with statements, that's a 24/7, 365 process.
I get that, but we're going to move towards a SEN first approach, which basically means everyone getting placed at the same time, because the minister's also, we don't have the plan, but he's also talking about the removal of statements. No child should need a statement, everyone should get the same education. But we don't get even the placements rate at the very beginning, and children waiting a longer period of time. And like this year, like we're seeing that change towards the SPIMs, because we don't have enough special schools. And I do have concerns also that there's children who should be in special schools are now in a SPIM. I don't believe all of them are getting the full support, listening to the teachers and school leaders that I engage with, and that really concerns me. But if we are going to be moving a part of this action plan to an approach of SEN first, surely that would mean that all children get placed at the same time.
Well, look, I suppose still, yes, I agree that what we want to do is make sure that we have sufficient capacity in the system so that children with SEN get placed at the right time in the right way, and if that aligns with mainstream, then that should be the case. I think the ambition set out by the Minister's statement is really helpful in terms of operational plan 2, which is very much around the SEN first approach that you just outlined. I think what that allows us to do operationally then is to go out to the system. The Minister has set a very clear direction with his operational plan 2 that this is very much about SEN first. So to give you an example, where we currently have across all of the schools at an aggregated level, there's only about 30% of schools that have specialist provisions. That allows us now, the direction of travel is that we can now go and speak to the other 70% and be very clear that there's a clear direction from the Minister and the Department that there's a requirement for those schools to work more closely and collaboratively with us in EA in terms of setting up those placements. So that's what's important about that SEN first piece, is that what it does is it signals to the system that the system needs to collaborate with the Education Authority in terms of delivering the placements.
And I get that deal, but we have to get to a place where there's children who were given placements back in August of 24 who only were getting into the SPIMs November, end of October, start of November, some were even delayed to December. That's a lot of missed school time where a mainstream child isn't losing that. And to be brutally honest, a lot of those children were not getting the support that they should have been getting from the EA, and maybe things feel a wee bit better. Certainly not from the parents that I've been engaging with. And some kids were only getting 30 minutes for the whole time between August to December. That's their education, 30 minutes. And that's the big problem with placements. If we don't get it right, there's children sitting at home who shouldn't be sitting at home. And if mainstream children are getting an education, those children deserve to get an education, and we must work towards it. And the only way to do it is to make sure that children are placed at the right same time as everybody else. Nobody should be starting school in September and another child sitting at home. That's the very least that parents want to hear from whatever we deliver in the coming years, because that's what has to happen. And then there's also, I worry about the operational side of a knock-on effect, because we do have children who should be in special schools or in the SPIMs. Then children who would benefit greatly from a SPIM or a unit are now with moderate learning difficulties, for example, are probably getting into a mainstream class too early. And then there's children who are in a mainstream class who would have got support from the EA. And this is something I'm only starting to pick up. I don't know if this is just a part of the change towards the training of the lit teams. But that support there for, say, a child with dyslexia isn't quite there where it would have been. So there's concerns that there's knock-on effects of displacement, and that's something I'm really worried about.
You've actually raised about 4 or 5 points there, but I'm going to try and maybe pick up on some of them. So look, I'm not aware of any child who has only had 30 minutes of education between the start of September and where we are now. Whenever we went about putting the placements in place, we were honest, and we said there will be construction projects that aren't going to finish until X period of time. And in the interim, we worked with every single individual school to agree with them that there would be suitable arrangements in place, contingency arrangements in place for those children. And none of those that I'm aware of are 30 minutes. If there is one of those, then please, I would like to know about that, because
very low. Maybe I'm exaggerating, 30 minutes.
We would want to deal with that.
It's quite low.
So look, and moving forward, it is going to be challenging. The number of children every year, so the number of children that are entering the system now has increased. We know that. So in simple terms, the number of SEN entering the children is much greater than the number of children that are leaving the system. So for the next 5 to 6 years, there is going to be an exponential rise of children in the system. And we have absolutely real challenges in terms of creating that additional capacity in the system. But we're working on that. We've got earlier, one of our, I guess, when we looked at lessons learned, I think one of our strong points was that we actually got a much better handle on our data. We now have a really good, strong dashboard which allows us to look at our data and try to start a plan ahead of the curve. So we have that, and that will help us. But we have challenges in that area, there's no doubt about that. In terms of what you say there around children not being placed in the right setting, again, I think, and maybe this is again being reflective on us as the Education Authority, and then maybe more broadly with yourselves in the committee and other politicians and other stakeholders, I think what we have to get away from is this kind of like blanket statement which says that not all children were placed, and so we have this kind of like domino effect that if there had been a special school place, then they would have got a special school place and they wouldn't have been in a different type of provision. We've got high levels of confidence that all children have been placed in an appropriate setting. It may be a different setting.
But there's children with very complex needs who should be in a special school or in SPINs now. They really should have got special schools, and they're in SPINs. And
again, what I'm saying is with high levels of confidence that I'd say the vast majority of children have been placed in the right setting. But moving forward, the same
support they would get in a special school, you're 100% confident.
They should have the same support that they get within special schools.
I think it's important to say that they would get the same support from the EA, and any of the specialist provisions that are being set up, they do have support from the SEN specialist support team for 2 years, and if they need it longer, that we're flexible within that as well. So there is a link officer who's involved with them throughout the whole process.
Has the ETA done an inspection of all the SPINs yet?
Yes, and they went out and did an inspection. They did like a survey or an inspection of the SPIMS provisions. Whether it captured all of the SPIMS or not, I'm not 100% sure. But overwhelmingly, there was a very good response to that, and the evidence suggests that those have been very successful. I think your other point about qualified people in the classroom and that, again, we would acknowledge it was very difficult to set up a huge amount of additional classroom provision and facilities and provision at relatively short notice, and at the same time be absolutely confident that we would make sure that every teacher that walked through the classroom into the classroom, or every classroom assistant, was absolutely experienced. That just couldn't happen. But we do, as Elaine said, have the specialist support team which is in there, and for any new provision they have a priority to support all those new specialist provisions within the first 2 years of their operation.
We're definitely running very, very quickly, Donny, and then we'll have to.
Yeah, no, it's just the knock-on effect of maybe the lit teams getting set up, that say literacy support that was getting into the classrooms, that seems to be a drop-off. But so just to highlight it, and not saying it's definitely happening, but I'm just picking that up.
I think it's a really important point on literacy.
Happy you answer it. I'm just conscious other members are needing to come in as well.
We again, in the interest of equity for all pupils, we had to date, we're moving from what was a very old legacy approach to literacy support, moving it into a much more equitable support. So it was called the discrepancy model. So again, I'm not the expert on the discrepancy model, but basically where we provided literacy support in the education sector was to a very small cohort of children where their reading score didn't match their IQ score and where there was a gap. So it only focused on about 10% of the population of children. But actually we know across both children who don't have SEN and children who have SEN, reading is a challenge and literacy is a challenge. So what we're doing as part of the local integrated teams is using the most recent evidence and the most modern practices, and we're introducing a different model of support for children with literacy, which will mean that all children, if a school decides that they feel whoever the child is within their population needs literacy support, they can refer that child. Whereas the old model was a bit more, it's this criteria, these are the only children that you can refer under that criteria. So actually, I believe that what we're putting in place is a much more equitable model of support for all children with literacy.
I just 30 seconds.
It would need to be 30 seconds, and then we'll bring other members in.
Just to say that the placement issue, the fundamental constraint here is the number of places that special schools and the number of specialist provision. If we had an unlimited supply, the debate about placements would just be of a fundamentally different order of magnitude. Dale makes the point that 30% of schools, so operational plan 2 as part of area planning will be published shortly. That will change the nature of the landscape in terms of the work we're doing to recalibrate special school provision and specialist provision. 30% of schools currently have specialist provision. As part of my own education, going out speaking to school principals, I can say without exemption, every school principal that I have talked to that has specialist provision on site has said to me unequivocally that is added to the value of the school for children without special education needs. It is a better place because those children without special needs are interacting with children. So I wanted to say, because that's a message I want the 70% to hear, and it's a message the minister wants them to hear.
Oh, I get that, and I'm sorry, and I don't mean it in that sense. I mean it as well, but there is children still right now on reduced timetables because the seconds aren't right. That's a fair point. And that's a problem. Yeah.
And look, I'm going to sort of give the EA the benefit of the doubt. I think operational plan 2, seeing that that is going to have a focus on specialist provision, not having it separate to the main operational plan. I think that is welcome. You reference principals saying about learning support classes for whatever term we want to use now as being a real positive in their school. I agree that is the feedback I hear, but they also say that what is not a positive is when they feel that it is rushed and not strategic and puts them under undue pressure and in mad rush to get it over the line over the summer months. They said that's not helpful. And that is actually what makes other principals reticent, because they're like, this looks like a chaotic process, whereas they'd rather it was planned. And let's hope we move to that.
No,
so genuinely mean let's hope we move to that.
That's fair. The other criticism that I would add to that, I have heard some principals say to me that when we are speaking to them about creating specialist provision, every time they turn up at school, we're there. As soon as they open the doors of specialist provision, they don't see us. So we need to do more to support schools once they create the specialist provision. And whether that's facilitating peer, because I think peer support is a very, very strong component of that, but we do need to do more there.
That's welcome acknowledgement. Cathy, you had indicated.
Thank you. And like others, thanks very much for your time here today. Dale, can I just pick up really briefly on something you said there just about that literacy support, and just to clarify something? I can't remember the terminology you said there, but can you confirm that there will still be one-to-one access to literacy support for children through this new model?
So the new model will do both one-to-one if a child specifically needs one-to-one, but there will also be opportunities where if Child X is referred in a school, we would like to be in a position where our member staff, our intervention officers, able to go out, and the school might say, well, Dale and Richard also could do with some literacy support, and that can be done in a small group setting, because the evidence suggests that for children who have literacy needs, actually working in a small group setting is as effective as addressing their needs as one-to-one. So again, I get there's some, I suppose, chat out there in the streets that we are removing one-to-one. Absolutely not. Where it is necessary and required, we will continue to do that. But equally, we're also going to take the opportunity to be much more ambitious in terms of trying to address the needs of more children at the same time, and use all of our services to go in and lean in and support those children. So the other thing, the benefit of the local impact teams is traditionally the literacy service would have went in and just managed the literacy issue. What we want to get to stages where our staff can go in, and maybe one child or a group of children might have a literacy need, but they actually also have a behaviour need, and that we can put in a range of services that can support that child right at that moment in time, rather than then also waiting for a subsequent referral to do the behaviour need. Mm-hmm. It's going to take us a while to get there, but absolutely, if a child needs one-to-one support, they will get one-to-one support.
Okay, thanks for that. Richard, it's really welcome. You said you've done so much engagement, and that's very clear that you have done a lot of engagement. Have you, or maybe can you tell us what engagement you've had directly with Senkos? It's something that the chair has mentioned around engagement with principals and stuff. What engagement have you had directly with the Senkos of schools?
I haven't sat down directly with Senkos as a group. I think I've encountered some Senkos in terms of actually being out at schools and some of the broader engagement I've done. But if that's sort of, if Senkos are saying that they would want to sit down and with me directly, and I'd spend whatever time that would be helpful.
That's really positive, because I genuinely think there is a gap there. There is a need for Senkos to be listened to. And I'll be completely honest, Dale, you said a statement there that was you removed the barrier with the educational psychologist assessment. There's department officials who sat here a number of months ago now, and said that same statement. And I'm not joking, my phone was red hot afterwards with Senkos and school leaders, because in reality, that is not the case, is what I'm being told. In reality, it's now, the workload has now been pushed onto Senkos. And I sat in a room with them, and honestly, a lot of them are at breaking point and don't see any light at the end of the tunnel as to how they move forward. So I'll be really interested to hear, you know, and I know we're waiting on a plan coming forward. What support will there be there for Senkos?
Well, I mean, obviously, back to everything that we're attempting to achieve to do is we need to recognise that EA can't come in and fix and deliver services and intervention services all the time. So what we need to do is build that capacity, build the capacity within schools, both within the Senkos and the broader school, both the teaching and the non-teaching staff. So look, I think one of the key pillar stones will be about that. You know, TPL, the professional learning for teachers within schools, giving them the tools in the toolbox to be able to deal with some of these issues earlier, but also lean into us as a support service to be able to go out and support them to problem solve themselves without having to necessarily call in us to do, you know, to bring in an intervention officer. So look, that's one of the key areas in there, and we know that Senkos are vital. We in terms of the LIT and that SEND transformation programme, EA's transformation programme has been engaging with Senkos, and a number of Senkos have been part of that. So look, equally, and I know Richard's given a commitment, but look, equally from our perspective, we're more than happy to engage, you know, at a greater degree with Senkos, happy to engage with them and take their feedback on that as well.
I do appreciate that, but it's like a lot of things, and even that's why I asked the question around the literacy support. In theory, a lot of this sounds fantastic, and it sounds like, you know, you mentioned there the Senko portal and things like that. But when you drill down into what the issues are, it's the reality of day-to-day life in these schools for these children. And that's the feedback that we're getting at the minute. But I know I'm going to be limited in time, so I really do appreciate that in terms of the Senkos, and reaching out to them would be good. A lot of the talk's been around SPIMS here, but in terms of special schools, would you agree that our special schools now are dealing with more and more complex medical needs and more complex challenging behaviours?
Yes. I mean, the special schools do an amazing job, and they're working in very difficult circumstances, and given even the pressure on the placements as well, you know, they've really stepped up to the plate. So look, yes, I do accept that. I think what we need to do though is find how do we solve the problems that present themselves in the special schools, and again being completely, you know, honest about that. Sometimes I think the system thinks that EA has all the answers to this as well, and yet ironically I think probably the people that are most expert in dealing with those issues are actually those professionals that are working in the special schools day in and day out. So what I think we need to do, and what we will be doing, I'm hopeful that we'll be doing as part of the transformation journey, is finding a way to unlock that professionalism and that expertise within the special schools, so that there can be like a peer-to-peer type support. So they do need more support, I agree, but I think some of it has to come from within, and EA doesn't have all the answers, but we will support the special schools to find those answers.
So they do. There's an acknowledgement that they do need that support. Can you please tell me why on-site nurses are being removed from our special schools then?
Again, my understanding that is a matter, those are decisions taken by the Health and Social Services Trusts.
And I understand that, and I get that, but what are you guys doing to support these? I've had an incident in my, and I know the chair's very aware of this case as well, in my own constituency, a really tragic incident of a pupil dying on site, and that school now has no on-site nurse, hasn't had an on-site nurse there that could have been dealing with that situation. Like, I get it that it's a health thing, but what are the EA doing to support that school? And the follow-up support that they have got has been atrocious since that incident as well.
I mean, I take the point you make, and I understand. I mean, those are devastating circumstances for anyone have to deal with. What we're doing, and as part of that ongoing dialogue, both with the department at a policy level and ourselves at an operational level. But there's no easy. I mean, the health service are withdrawing resources, partly because they don't have the money to pay for the resources, but partly because these are very, very scarce resources. And
I get that, Rich. I do. I understand.
Yeah.
But what is the EEA specifically doing to help that school and to fight for that resource for that school.
I don't know if there's anything I mean, you can say at a
Can
practical
I
level.
just add something here, just because I am familiar with this issue, dealt with a lot of the special school principals. I had a meeting with PHA, trusts and the EA around the withdrawal of nursing provision, sent a very detailed letter to all those stakeholders asking for some very specific information. Nobody gave me the courtesy of a response. It wasn't until I met with the Minister that anything landed on my desk. That's not good enough. So I think the question, what is actually being done by the EA, what is the EA doing to go out to bat for those special schools, is a valid one.
Well, I suppose firstly, I apologise that you didn't get a response, and I hope that that wouldn't be the norm from me or from my colleagues here today, and I'll certainly go back and look into what happened with that, Chair. That is tragic, and it is always horrific in any school community when a child dies. There is a response from the EA, but I know that's not what you're talking about. You mean, prior to that, but I feel I do need to highlight that there is a critical incident response team that will go in and support any school where that is the case, or a member of staff has died where there's a critical incident, and that is made up from a number of different services across the EA, including our education psychology service. In terms of what we're doing now, we would be batting for our special schools. Do I think that that's perfect? No, and I had a meeting with Nick and some of our special school principals recently around how we can better respond when they feel that they are in a crisis situation, and I'm hoping that we're going to be able to take that forward in the very, very near future. If there's opportunities for us to work better with health, absolutely, we will take them, and work with our sponsoring department in relation to that as well.
If I think the other thing, Dad, is my understanding is that, again, it's a little bit like where we used to be 5 boards. The 5 trusts did things differently, so the shift in direction, I think it was 2 trusts made the decision, whereas there had been 3 other trusts that did not have school-based nursing support. I think the critical question, and we will go back again and ask it from our perspective, the critical question is making sure that there's appropriate nursing support and access to nursing support in the school. I think that's for health to answer in terms of providing us with assurances that they can provide the relevant level of medical support in those scenarios. I'm maybe not sure it's for us to go in and say we think you need to have a school-based nurse, but I think it's absolutely right to pose the question and revisit that particular issue about what's the best way to support children with complex medical needs when they're on site in special schools.
David?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for your presentations so far. I'm probably going to go a little parochial, but I think it's an issue that affects Northern Ireland wide, and it's about the school estate, and it probably comes from a visit I done on Friday to Dundonald High School, which is a school which was earmarked for closure in 2012, I think it was, and has had a significant turnaround since then, both in terms of numbers. It's full to the gills now, but also in terms of performance, and credit to the teachers and the school leadership who have achieved that over that period, and they're doing great work. But they're doing great work, as a lot of our schools are, in facilities that are not perfect. They're really shouldn't be in use, I have to say, in terms of what I seen on Friday. I'll give a few examples. At times they've 1 out of 5 boilers not working, or 1 out of 5 boilers working. They've holes in walls currently covered by Corex that were reported in May. It was reported in May, but has not yet been fixed. They have only 2 toilets that they can open during a day at times because of issues with the plumbing that they've been told by EA, I believe, that it is too expensive to fix. And I mean, that to me that seems, those basic facilities that and they are, like a lot of our high schools, and something Pat sometimes disagree but agree on, in terms of they are one of those schools that are shouldering some of the challenges in terms of they do have special needs children being supported there. They do have over 25 different languages because of a significant asylum seeking population within the school now as well. And it feels like they're shouldering a lot of that burden, and they don't have the support. And I recognise the resource challenges, and there isn't a magic wand that can be woven. I think that there having been, I suspect that having been earmarked for closure in 2012 has prevented in some way them starting that process. That, addressing those challenges stopped them starting the process of looking towards a new school. But they're in a very different situation now. And Dundonald is a growing place, so I don't foresee that challenge emerging again. What can be done in the meantime? I mean, I don't envisage a new school appearing in Dundonald very quickly, though I will fight for it. But what can be done in the meantime to make sure that those schools that are sharing a lot of the burden have the bare basics in terms of the facilities that they should have, and that, particularly in that maintenance piece. But even to give an example, that sort of SPIM or their special needs provision is in a very small classroom, not enough space, and yet you have ground area space allocated to, or that is, in law for HE for art and so on. You have SPIMs in a very small space there. They've done away with staff rooms and so on, in order to accommodate, like a lot of schools. But what can we do in the meantime? Yeah,
I mean, I'll say something from my perspective. This isn't Dale's area of responsibility, although he used to be involved in it, so he might. I don't think there's any answer I can give you that I would think that you would judge as satisfactory, or certainly I would be comfortable giving to you. The simple reality is that too much of our school's estate is below the standard that is acceptable for an educational setting for children. It's that simple. It's just not good enough, and we don't have the money. Now that sounds like, well, we don't have the money. How many times have I said that? The one point I have made to a number of principals when I've been out with them is, please be assured that there isn't somebody sitting in the education authority and you've made a case to get something fixed, and we could either fix it or we couldn't, and we could do either, and we've just decided not to because we don't believe you that it needs fixed. We believe you and we want, but we physically don't have the money, so we're trying to do more and more with less and less. It's an intolerable position. How we will fix it, when there is more money available, that obviously will be a big enabler of this. Now, bear in mind, the executive, I think we're just coming up on the 12-month anniversary of the executive having come back, and it was the 3rd of February last year. One of the priorities, I think, for the executive is to move more into the space of medium to long-term planning. We're still in a 1-year planning cycle. Actually, one of the things that will help us is having visibility, because the issue, and I take your point, Dundonald in any environment is a long way away from a new school. But at times the view, well, we'll not do something because there's the possibility of a new school. You need to have the long vision, so you can say, well, the new school is happening in year 7. So that can't be an excuse for not doing something in years 1 to 6, because we can't ask the children to come. I think
they're looking to do that now, and I certainly have. I've asked for officials to come down and visit that are across capital build projects and so on.
But we need to do that. At a very micro level, one of the things we need to do is, our colleagues in the maintenance say, creating a bit more, and this isn't going to solve any of these big problems, but creating a bit more flexibility at local level for schools to deal with some of their own issues. One of the constant concerns is that they're forced to use central contracts, which are very expensive, and there's a local solution. We're trying to find ways.
They raised that with me, that in general procurement terms, that they spend a lot more money than they need to on things because they're forced to use central contracts whenever, it's a very, very small example, but they had to spend £75 on a toaster whenever, tenner out of Amazon or whatever, but that goes to their computers as well. There's a lot bigger examples that I could go through of pages here of things that could buy. But procurement was a big thing for them as well.
And we're trying to carve out, and obviously whatever we do must be compliant with the law. But one of the big issues with procurement is, for an organisation this size spending this much money as a sector, the legislation forces us to aggregate demand and go to the market with contracts. When you go to the market with a contract, you can only give the contract to the best deal that's on the table in front of you. And I've seen this time and time again across the public sector, whatever aggregated contract you sign at any given point in the year, you will find some supplier who opportunistically can do you a better deal. But the reality is, if you take a toaster, somebody can give you a toaster for a tenner, we're paying 75. Could that person supply 50,000 toasters a year, which is what our demand and what we need to contract for? So, but I think there's more we can do with finding some flexibility in that, and that's work that...
If schools had more flexibility and autonomy over that, you wouldn't need to be looking for 50,000 of those. They would have responsibility of...
I'll not take the easy approach of saying I looked to the legislature to fix that problem for us.
I think one of the successes of the organisation is that we have recently just got new contracts in place. So we had legacy contracts, and to be honest with the committee, that was challenging. You know, we faced some legal challenges from incumbent contractors where there was a perception that they owned these contracts, and again we had to work our way through that. Certainly inherently, but within that, the new contract is much more better value for money around that. In terms of the maintenance, I think what I know the colleagues in operations and estates and colleagues in DE are working closely together to look at what is our capital strategy for the estate, because very much, I mean, I think you're right. I think we need to flip it a wee bit, and there needs to be a greater focus of capital expenditure on maintenance and looking after what we look after. So there still needs to be conversations about where we spend our money. There's also what I would add, the
sustainability of that, and whether it's very many cases maybe that maintenance will, but where it's a false economy, you know, where does it become more expensive to upkeep this old building than it is?
Exactly. So what we need, you know, in simple terms, we need to have a program for every single school that says after 10 years, I'm making this up, you get new windows. Every 15 years, you get a new boiler, and it doesn't come to the stage that EA, for example, is forced in a situation in 15 years' time to say that those 100 schools aren't getting their boilers. And I think by doing that we would maintain what we have. It's a bit like keeping your car on the road. I think the other factor in terms of that,
briefly deal on this just to
so look, I think that capital strategy piece between DE and EA is really important, and setting that out for the future in terms of how we spend our money. The final point is we also have an unseen infrastructure, which is our digital infrastructure as well, and that puts pressure on the capital expenditure. So more schools have, you know, making sure that your internet's in place, making sure that you've got cyber security, making sure the schools are kept up to date with computers, etc. So,
and I know the minister moved on some of that, but they did make the point that the computers they have, sometimes it's 25 minutes for those computers to actually be up and working, and that's class time, and by the time, you know, shortens very much the actual learning that the kids can do. But thank you very much for your answers. Thanks, Chair.
Not sure how this will work. So Michelle is online and has submitted a couple of questions because she has lost her voice. So we'll see how this goes. I might not be able to provide any commentary on these questions, so we'll do our best. We'll see if Michelle can help. So the first question Michelle has asked me just to put forward is around early years, and she has asked that how will the SEN Early Years Inclusion Service change as part of the transformation agenda?
SEN Early Years Inclusion. And what, I suppose it'd be helpful to know in what respect.
Well,
can you say it all, Michelle? No.
I think
you can text me if you...
Yeah. Sorry, I mean, obviously, I think we're struggling to provide a comprehensive answer. If you're okay, we could take that away and come back. I mean, one part of Wood says it's difficult to have granularity because we're still developing the delivery plan, which will set out the detail of it. But in terms of, if we come back with a written response in terms of early years specifically, if that's helpful.
And equally, Michelle, happy to engage directly with you in that and put you directly into contact with the right people in EA to give you the answer as well if you want to have a meeting or discussion around it.
No, that's fine. It seems Michelle has really completely lost her voice, so that's
I feel like she's typing something.
Okay, we'll see what lands.
Sure, if the next question's really difficult, maybe we'll lose our voices.
No, I think this one. Well, I don't think this is an easy one, but it's
changing.
SEN just wants to know if it is changing, if the delivery of SEN Early Years Inclusion Service is changing.
The Early Years Inclusion Service is a little bit like the local integrated team, so it will be part of a local integrated team structure, and it will be very much, rather than that will be based on the same structure. So yes, it is changing, Michelle, in that perspective. So again, look, we will come back to you with more detail on that.
So next question, I don't think it's an easy one, but hopefully one that you'll be able to provide a response to. And the question that Michelle has asked, and I think it relates back to the minister's statement. in terms of from the EA perspective, how you measure outcomes for SEND children. So what is the measure of outcomes for SEND children in terms of whether your services are having the impact? And is that going to feed into the wider outcomes framework that will be developed for the transformation agenda and the delivery plan?
I think that's a really insightful question, Chair. I personally...
Well, it's not mine.
No, I'm more than a little uncomfortable at where we sit here today. Now, I'm a great advocate of whatever you do in life, be certain of what you're aiming for. You know, where are you going to land the plane before you take off? I think in terms of saying, I spent an awful lot of time last year working proactively with colleagues in the same placements issue, and I think at times I sounded like a broken record. It's got to be about more than getting a child a place at a school. It's got about thinking. Now, at times we can maybe go a bit too far, and we can talk about making sure every child fulfills his or her potential. I think that's what we've got to do, but I think we need to better define what actually is their potential. The outcome measures, as I see them at the moment, and why I think they're unsatisfactory, the two figures that were in the Minister's statement were the percentage of children with SEND who received GCSE, or the percentage of children with SEND who attended higher education. I think that's a wonderful aspiration for some children with special education needs, but there are big cohorts of children with special education needs that neither of those two things are ever going to be achievable. We've got to have something else for them to aim for. So there's a big piece of work for us to be absolutely clear about what is the outcome. Fundamentally, we exist to improve the lives of those children, and we've got to do that and demonstrate it and be able to measure it in a way that we're not doing at the moment. So for me, and Dale and I have talked about this over the last 48 hours, that's a big focus of the work in parallel with the delivery plan. The delivery plan is the route map to take us somewhere. We need to know where we're going with this.
And just to add, in terms of the local impact teams, we will have measurable metrics around that, Michelle, where we will be able to demonstrate. So, you know, for one child, it could be that they've moved the ability to a reading level of X, Y, Z, or whatever that is. So we have built a management information system that should allow us to start capturing the nuances of improvements for children with special educational needs. So like that will be part of the outworkings of our local impact teams as well. And I'm sure at some point in the future we'll be able to come back and give you some information on that.
Would I be right in saying, because the second part of Michelle's question was about the outcomes framework that the Minister referred to that would be associated with the delivery plan, are the sort of measures that you're thinking about in terms of measuring outcomes for children with special educational needs, will we see those in that outcomes framework, or are we not there yet?
I suspect that piece of work will sit alongside some of the work that we're doing. So for example, if we're looking at new models of professional support in the classroom chair, alongside that we will want to build an evaluative piece in there, so that if, for example, we were to run a pilot, then we would be able to come back and be very clearly able to demonstrate that that particular model does deliver, you know, good outcomes for children and young people in those scenarios.
But I think, Chair, obviously I don't want to preempt what the Minister may decide over the coming weeks and publish. I think given the importance of this piece of work and where we are now, it's more likely that the delivery plan will specify what we're doing in the outcome space and what we're going to do to articulate and measure outcomes, as opposed to, as you have asked, will it give us the finished article? There's the set of outcomes that we're shooting for. I don't think we're there yet, and it's too complex to rush that, because that's got to shape the work we do over the next 3 to 5 years. So it's really important to get it right.
Well, thank you for that. I think just time is probably beating us, so I'm going to bring Cara in now for the last question. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. I have two questions, so I'll just put them together and see where we end up. Thank you firstly for being here, and it's been really helpful, I think, for us as a committee to get a full picture of where things are. I just want to follow up on the issue of engagement and feedback mechanisms within the EA. Can you detail the level of engagement that you've had with parents of SEND children, how you're listening to them, and what methods you're utilising to do that? Just recently in my own constituency, you know, I've spoken with them. They're experts, I suppose, through lived experience, and they just want the best learning environment and experience for their children. So can you just talk us through how you're identifying the issues they feel there is within the EA and how you're using that feedback to improve things?
Yeah. There'll be lots of detailed engagement in terms of the sort of the casework aspect of it. And I have met with now I'll be honest, that's not something I've done in the last couple of months, but in the earlier part of last year, probably in the summer, I met with some of the advocacy groups for the parents groups. You know, that was partially an introductory meeting, and you know, at a high level, so there hasn't been a really granular engagement. The meat of what we get in terms of the parental view comes, I think, Elaine, I'm right in saying, from the detailed conversations and dialogue you have in individual cases.
Yeah, well, there's a number of things. So again, a team would meet with parental advocacy groups fairly regularly. We within the statutory assessment review service, we have an advice and information service, very small team, but actually we got more people employed recently, and they would probably be our primary team who would lead on parent engagement. So as part of the NDN review, they were involved in meeting with specific parent groups in different localities under the DE review. The other thing that we have done in the last year is drop-in clinics for parents. Now, in some areas, particularly in Belfast, that was really successful, and we had a number of parents coming to each of those, so we're carrying those on. But in maybe more rural areas, that hasn't been as widely taken up. And then, of course, there is, every child will have the SEND link officer who is linked to them, and moving forward, a SEND support officer as well. And I suppose it would be wrong for me not to highlight the role of the family support link officer that we had last summer for those children who we didn't manage to get a placement by the 30th of June.
I think, can I add, sorry for interrupting, I think to add to that, as part of the local impact teams, we've had a very specific parent reference group as well.
Yeah.
So they have had, the programme team have had regular engagement with parents to kind of run through some of the thinking about how services might operate in the future around that. So that there is a mechanism there that is in place, and obviously myself as well, along with other senior colleagues, meet with advocacy groups, and we've been reaching out to advocacy groups and asking them, you know, if they want us to meet with parents, we're more than happy to do so.
That's good. Their voices are heard. I'm just thinking in the sort of rural context. Have you ever thought of doing like a digital drop-in?
We've done that as well.
That's
Actually,
great.
yes,
Okay.
where there's been online.
Just thinking of ways to tap into the rural space. And then just lastly, while I have you here, I thought I'd ask around Board of Governors. A few months ago, one of the committee meetings that really stuck with me was we had a discussion around addressing Bullying in Schools Act of 2016, and it became apparent that there's a severe lack of data and monitoring when it comes to bullying and the nature of bullying in Northern Ireland, and we had discussions around the Board of Governors and their role, and potential moments of conflict of interest and things like that. Will there be any efforts or engagement between yourself and the Department of Education to look into this further, just recognising how crucial it is that we do monitor effectively bullying in Northern Ireland? And it kind of ties in with the SEN aspect of things as well.
I think this is one of those ones we probably need to come back on, because we have our EA addressing bullying team, which supports schools in terms of how, you know, first of all, it's a training and advice and guidance to schools, but also if there's particularly complex cases, that team will go in and support the schools. I just don't have the detail with me in terms of capturing the data.
I could say, though, that schools do have a responsibility now in terms of recording and having that data, and that team that Dirk refers to will help them in terms of the implementation of that.
When they were here, it didn't fill us with much confidence. You know, it just didn't seem that there was mandatory to what extent in bringing that kind of information forward, and schools didn't want to be seen to have lots of bullying incidents, so there was conversations that they were less likely to sort of put it into documentation, but no, that fills me with some more confidence, and sure, if you've any more details to hand, please come back to me. Thank you.
And I think myself and the clerk were actually speaking this morning around that legislation and about whether we need to think about some post-legislative scrutiny on that. So it would obviously involve your team, but more widely as well. So that's something we can pick up. Okay, look, I've given a fair bit of latitude with time today, as I think there was a big appetite to engage with yourselves today. So thank you for giving up your time this afternoon. And look, we look forward really to seeing what happens in this space. We are very aware of the scale of the challenge, and we hope to see progress in the weeks and months ahead. But I think it's important to note there are a lot of schools and a lot of parents, I imagine, who will be watching this session with interest, because we all know over the last number of years things have not been where they should, and you know we're hopeful, but we understand the scale of the challenges is pretty significant. But we do thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just before we move on from this item, it would probably be good to do a check-in if there are any actions arising at all in terms of follow-up on anything specific. So did you get a note or anything on that session, Claire?
Yes, so I suggested that the committee write to EA to ask for the numbers of SENCOs. Also the committee write about removal of on-site nurses in special schools, so that would be for the Department of Health via the Committee for Health. And then really those three questions that Michelle had: how will the SEN Early Years Inclusion Service change as part of the transformation? How are EA currently measuring outcomes for SEN children, and what role will they have played in developing the outcomes framework the Minister referenced earlier this week? And what are the constraints referred to in the letter EA provided alongside its briefing? So we didn't get to rehearse that one in open session, but Michelle had sent it through.
Yeah, okay. No, that's fine.
And just Elaine had said that she would look to see if they had information about the allied health professionals.
HPs, yes, I think that's worth picking up again.
We add something about bullying as well, the transparency piece. Yeah, it's just that briefing that we had months and months ago. I remember I couldn't believe the lack of detail that they had on the nature of bullying, the prevalence, all that kind of stuff.
I think definitely something I'm happy to note at this stage. I think for forward work planning that there's interest to engage on that issue, and I think EA and more widely. I think just
for the meantime, what specifically would you like on bullying?
Even a response from the department just to find out the technicality around. I think they had used the word mandatory, but when we had that briefing months previous, there's no I don't think they do any checks or spot checks or look at the data that has been gathered if it is being reported and maintained in the school. If that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway, you want to
I was just going to say, as maybe part of the forward work plan as well, it's just about having maybe that joint with health, because they're going on a pathway of setting it up where health can slot in, and then later on answering a question around the nurses saying, yeah, it's really health. Are health ever going to buy into this?
I mean, I think we have our meeting, I think, in early February, a concurrent meeting with the Health Committee, and I think that is the forum we really try and raise that, and we actually have the Chief Allied Health Professional attending that session, which I think will be really helpful.
Is that actually on the 3rd of February or the week beginning 3rd of February?
Is it the 19th?
It's the 3rd of Monday.
It's later in February.
In Middletown Centre for Autism.
So,
19th of February.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
I thought it was interesting to hear Dale talk about building that system that everyone can slot in if they want to, but it's just trying to understand probably going for how that works, because I think the bit we've picked up before is that it still sounds like you've got different departments getting their teams together first, which feels to me sort of like building the silos before you. Yeah. And it's just a cultural thing, and they may have very good reasons for it, but I still don't feel like I understand why it has to be done separately.
I'm very conscious, it's not the EA's remit to get the Department of Health on board. They have a role, but it is not their remit, so that we
just need to get to the bottom of why or where is the issue.
You're absolutely right.
David, did you want anything further on procurement? That line of questioning?
I guess probably, if I'm honest, it's probably an area that I need to get more across myself from conversation and trying to understand where I was reading, even as we were talking there, some of the procurement stuff, so I may come back to you in future with requests, but I don't have anything just at the moment.
Just on that last point you made, Nick, in terms of it's not the EA's responsibility to bring the Department of Health to the game. Yes, I agree, but it is the responsibility of the EA to audit how many children have SEN, what their needs are, and what type of allied health professionals are needed. I mean, they should be providing that to the department. The department should be demanding it. Yeah. Whichever way that relationship works, it's obviously not completely repaired yet. So.
Well, I think we're all agreed that the engagement from health is vital, and the lack of understanding, I think, in the education system of exactly what is needed and what is available is pretty concerning. We have established that today pretty clearly. I'll just add, just on that issue of the nursing provision in special schools, I think it's a really important one to raise, and I do want to make the point that yes, these are these are Department of Health funded nurses who are going into schools, and I take the point, you know, that's you know not a ultimately EA is not the decision maker, but I would like to know they understand the needs of those schools. So what are they doing to argue for the need for that provision? They should be listening to schools and understand what is needed. My engagement on that issue around nursing, I haven't got a sense that the EA were really at the table to the extent they needed to be on that, and I felt that the changes were happening to them rather than them being a partner in the discussion. So I do think it is really important to get their view on it. I am aware the Minister of Health is undertaking a review of that, and we'll watch that with interest. But
so just to comment on that point as well, I think it would be important to note, you know, the support service that there is after an incident or something like that happens. Because I don't really buy it that support's there for I've heard it firsthand that support's not there. So if we could get some sort of indication as to what that support looks like as well, so that we can see, is it adequate, is it enough, or does more need to be done?
I think that's a proposal I'd be very happy to support. I think it's absolutely appropriate if there is a tragic incident takes place in a school. Of course, there are legalities that kick in and you know, inquiries that need to be undertaken. But there's also a level of duty of care to the employees who are involved in that, and I think that it is really, I think it would be good to get clarity as to what the EA's support services look like in that scenario. So I absolutely agree. Okay, so we've run over time. I do think it was appropriate for that session to allow that to happen, but we'll quickly go through what's remaining of correspondence. Now, unfortunately, there is quite a bit of correspondence to get through, but I'll try and address it as quickly as possible. We covered item 9.2. Item 9.3, page 181, it's the departmental response to the Youth Assembly correspondence around mobile phones. I'm just going to propose we forward that to the Youth Assembly. Are we agreed? Agreed. Item 9.4, page 184, it's correspondence from the department informing the committee of a joint departmental review with the Department for the Economy of SEA regulation. I'll just very, very briefly speak to this. I had a read through the correspondence, and my initial feeling is just this is like fiendishly complex. I mean, there just seem to be layers and layers of admin and bureaucracy around this. So I think we can note the correspondence, but I would suggest we might want to seek evidence on that particular issue around SEA regulation, but also the wider landscape review of SEA. So I think if we could invite the department to come in to speak to that, or SEA, or both as appropriate, I feel there was just a highly complex set of arrangements. So would we be agreed on that? Right. Item 9.5, page 193, correspondence from the Institute of Physics, providing some papers and thanking us for a meeting we facilitated with myself and the clerk last year. I just want to note I thought it was a really helpful and constructive meeting, and I would certainly be happy to propose that we do invite the Institute to come in and give evidence. I wouldn't suggest, perhaps given the pressures on committee at the minute, that we would necessarily have that as an immediate priority, but for at some point over the course of the year. And it might be an opportunity to discuss some of the wider issues around shortages in STEM teaching workforce, and maybe some of the gaps in careers advice that they highlighted. Would be agreed? Agreed. Item 9.6, correspondence from the Finance Committee asking for details of the committee's engagement around the Fujitsu contract. I'll just deal with both these at the same time. We have correspondence now just in from the department around the Fujitsu contract at item 9.24, so I would suggest we share that correspondence with the Finance Committee so that they can see how we have engaged. Are we agreed? Item 9.7, page 242, it's correspondence from the Children's Commissioner's Office following up on a previous meeting regarding school governance. We're currently liaising through the clerk with both Peach's organisation and Nikki to arrange a further private session of the committee around some of those issues. Unless there's anything to update beyond that, I think that all is in hand if we're agreed. Agreed. Item 9.8, page 244, it's an invitation for the chairperson, myself, to take part in a panel on bereavement information and support for children in educational settings. That's on the 11th of February. That's provisionally accepted, but just would need to get committee approval that they're content for me to attend that. Great. Item 9.9, correspondence from the department with an update on the 14 to 19 framework. I have to say I found both our last bits of correspondence through on the 14 to 19 framework, which seems to be the pattern, regrettably, to be very light. So I just wanted to check quickly for an update through yourself, Clark, if there is an update on a concurrent meeting with Economy. Is that something that is scheduled in? Are we looking at that?
Yes, Economy proposed it, and this committee decided that it would like to do it, but not until April time.
Yes,
and the Economy Committee also envisaged that both ministers would attend, and this committee was interested in that as well. So those arrangements are underway.
If we're agreed, I think as long as that's before the summer recess, that feels a reasonable time scale. But I think that is an important one. I don't want to lose sight of that on our agenda. So that's fine if that's in hand. Item 9.12, page 253. It's a response from Sina G regarding its engagement with the department's end-to-end review of SEN. Indicated positive process, it was useful, but as all has shared its paper, the provision for special educational needs and disabilities in the Irish medium sector. I would want to suggest that perhaps we have agreed to write to the Minister already around his statement. There was very brief mention of Irish medium education in there. It was sort of looked to support as appropriate. I would suggest that as maybe part of that we should share that correspondence from Sina G and ask for substantially more detail on the Minister's assessment of the needs in the Irish medium sector in relation to SEN and how he plans to address those. Would be great. Item 9.15, page 329 is correspondence from the Finance Committee, and it's a further correspondence from the Department of Justice providing information on potential equality impacts of the draft budget 25-26, and the Finance Committee I think is seeking whether we have had anything similar from Education. My understanding, I have an awareness that there was an EQIA that closed on the 24-25 budget just recently, but I'm not aware of anything on 25-26, so I propose we would write to the department and ask for clarity if they will be carrying out any sort of equality impact assessment for 25-26. Agreed. Item 9.16, page 377, it's correspondence from Cara around an invitation to, extending an invitation to Microsoft to deliver a presentation on the role of AI in enhancing children's learning experiences. So, happy for Cara to speak to that very briefly. I suppose the only thing I would want to just put on record is slight concern just around inviting a private company to committee who may be engaged in contracts in this space, and that I'm just so maybe happy to take a view on that.
I never thought,
but just to get your views on it, and then we'll see what.
I had a really, really interesting meeting with them. It was my last meeting before we closed up for Christmas, and we were talking about challenges with educational disadvantages. And talking through, how AI can have like child-centered learning, so they can change. It's like a child can be handed a perfect piece of education for them. So if say they're really good at English but terrible at maths, or maybe one particular part of maths, and AI, you basically put in what the child is good or bad at, and then it will throw back out something that's tailored to their needs. So I have obviously been very vocal about the dangers of AI, but then I think it is important to look at, if we're looking at serving children and young people efficiently as we can, and we recognise there are parts, particularly deprived communities across the north, that do struggle with education outcomes. I think AI could be something we could explore. I do note that the Skills APG is looking at AI with regard to skills and moving forward, so maybe it's just something we can collaborate on, or perhaps we could visit Microsoft or go from there.
So look, I'm happy to open that out. I'm certainly not, and I would agree. I think there are undoubtedly real opportunities with AI in the educational space, but some challenges and threats as well. Do members have a view around whether or not we consider it appropriate for Microsoft to come into committee? I think they may have presented to committee in the previous mandate.
Maybe Apple was in before.
Maybe an informal.
Perhaps an informal briefing. Would members be open to that? An informal briefing in the first instance, and look, there may be things arising from that in terms of maybe some engagement with academics. There is also the group AICC, funded by the Department of Economy, which has a focus on how we can harness AI across the executives. That again could have an educational focus on that. So we'll look to an informal briefing in the first instance. Thank you for that, Cara. Right. Item 9.19, page 405. It's an invitation from Gail Lynn for a committee member to attend their Skulls Braga event on the 23rd of January. I would just propose we note that for diaries. But it's
I'll be at that anyway, Chair.
yeah, it's provisionally in my diary. I have maybe a clash arising, but I think from Michelle had also suggested she might be attending, so I think we'll hopefully get attendance at that, and it's a scheme the committee's been very supportive of previously. Item 9.2 is correspondence from the EA in relation to legislation underpinning placement of SEND pupils. That arose from correspondence from an individual who contacted the committee. Are we content to share that with the original correspondent? Agreed. Item 9.21, page 422, response from the EA on zero emission vehicles and fleet management. Are we content to note and forward that to the Committee for Infrastructure who'd raised the query? Agreed. Donna, you get to look at that. Item 9.22, page 426 is correspondence from Angel Eyes NI seeking to brief the committee on its report Education Access in Ireland for Students with a Visual Impairment. So I need to declare an interest in this. My wife is an employee of Angel Eyes, but I've engaged with them long before she was ever recruited to that role, and I'm certainly happy to say that I think we should engage with them. It's sponsored the event to when they came to Parliament Buildings to launch it, and I think it's a really interesting All Ireland picture of provision. So we agreed that we would invite. Item 9.28, page 462, a response from the department regarding access to auditory verbal therapy in schools. That's on the back of our informal briefing from AVT. Are members content to note and forward that response on to auditory, the charity representing auditory verbal therapy? Agreed. Item 9.33, correspondence from Bruiser Theatre Company on its work with school children and RSE. I'm happy to seek members' views. I think it would be helpful to perhaps add that to our papers for the inquiry. I think it has an element of how the arts can maybe feed into RSE. Other than that, I would suggest that we note, or we agreed.
Yeah, I mean, you could go to see the play maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if members want to go and see the play, absolutely. You can have a look on their website, and I'm sure it'll be great. Item 9.34, page 495, an invitation from Advice NI to its AGM on the 30th of January. I'd suggest we note for diaries if we're agreed. Item 9.35, page 497, it's correspondence from the department providing a written briefing on January monitoring 24-25. Again, at this stage, I would propose we note. We agreed. Agreed. Item 9.36, page 503, correspondence from the EA in relation to the Special Educational Needs SEND Capacity Programme. That came on the back of correspondence from Lisnagarvey High School, so are we content to note and forward that response to the school? Agreed. And finally, it's a bit of a marathon this, I apologise. Item 9.37, page 507, is a response from the department providing further information on some issues arising from our early years in childcare briefing. I would propose that we note, but if there's anything, it's a fairly long piece of correspondence. If we do want to bring anything back, we could perhaps do that next week, unless there's a clear action on it. I have to say I hadn't had time to read it in detail today.
No, and there's a lot of information on it, but it's just one thing that's struck me, Chair, and it's something that you had raised before as well, was around the preschool standardisation. And I know it has been raised before around the kind of inequalities and some schools being left out of it and things like that. I was just wondering if we could perhaps as a committee write back and maybe try and get some clarity as to what the next steps of that is going to be, because there are some schools there who have neighbouring schools perhaps getting this 22.5 hours and they're left at a severe disadvantage.
I'm hearing that consistently, that around admissions settings are really concerned that there's now a complete patchwork and that some settings are now going to be prioritised over others. So I mean, I would be I think it might be helpful to get a specific briefing on preschool standardisation if members are agreed.
Agreed, yeah.
I think it would be good for schools to get some certainty what's the next phase of this. So, okay, that's great, thank you, Kathy. Other than that, are we agreed to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 176? Great. Okay, item 10 is the forward work programme. It is pretty well populated already, so I'm not going to suggest we look at it in detail, but encourage members to continue feeding through any issues that they would like to see on there. We've got plenty of scope much onwards, so let's get that populated. Item 11 is any other business. Is there any? And item 12 is the date, time and place of next meeting, and that will be Wednesday the 22nd of January at 2 p.m. and it's down in my notes as it Teams. It's definitely not on Teams, it is in room 29. So on that basis I'll put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Agreed?
Agreed.
Committee room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound.